true scary stories for sleep. Welcome to the Midnight Echoes. Before we dive into tonight's stories, I'd love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop a comment below. It's always fascinating to see where our viewers are tuning in from. If you enjoy the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, unwind, and prepare for tonight's eerie adventures. I still remember that night, as if it happened yesterday. I was just settling in for a quiet evening, ready to unwind after a long day, when I heard a faint rustling noise. It was so subtle at first that I brushed it off as the wind or maybe the old house creaking. But as the minutes passed, the noise grew louder, more distinct, and suddenly, it hit me. A chilling realization that someone else was in the house. My heart raced, and I felt a wave of fear wash over me. I was no longer alone. I tried to steady my breathing, thinking of what to do next. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call for help, but it was too late. As I turned to reach for it, I saw the closet door slowly creak open, and there he was, a man, wild-eyed and trembling, staring right at me. My stomach dropped, and time seemed to slow down. For a split second, we both stood frozen, locked in a silent standoff, each waiting for the other to make the first move. It was eerie how calm everything felt, but underneath that calm was a storm of terror brewing inside me. Then, without warning, he lunged. I barely had time to react, stumbling backward as he charged toward me. My mind was racing. Where could I go? How could I escape? I dashed through the hallway, my footsteps echoing against the hardwood floors as I tried to put as much distance between us as possible. Every corner I turned, every door I passed, I could feel him getting closer, his presence haunting me like a shadow that wouldn't let go. It was a terrifying game of cat and mouse, and I was running out of time. I knew I had to get out of the house. My only chance was the back door, but as I reached it, I realized with horror that it was locked. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, trying desperately to open it before he caught up. But it was too late. He was right behind me. I could feel his breath on my neck, and in that moment, panic took over. I abandoned the door and sprinted up the stairs, hoping to find some sort of refuge. But deep down, I knew there was no safe place left in the house. As I reached the top of the stairs, I quickly ducked into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in the small, enclosed space. I could hear him outside, his footsteps slow and deliberate, as if he knew exactly where I was. The eerie silence between his movements was haunting, and I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. Every creak, every shift in the air felt like a warning, a reminder that he was still out there, waiting. Minutes felt like hours as I sat in that bathroom, trapped in a nightmare that refused to end. My mind raced through possible escape plans, but each one seemed more futile than the last. I couldn't stay there forever. Stepping outside felt like walking into the jaws of a predator. Then, out of nowhere, the sound of police sirens cut through the silence. It was a sound I never thought I'd be so relieved to hear. Somehow, in my panic, I had managed to hit the emergency call button on my phone without realizing it. The next few moments were a blur. The police arrived just in time, bursting through the front door and apprehending the intruder before he could reach me. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but it was quickly overshadowed by the lingering fear that clung to me like a second skin. Even with him gone, the house didn't feel safe anymore. Every corner seemed to hide a shadow. Every sound echoed with a chilling reminder of what had happened. It was as if the very walls were haunted by the memory of that night. In the days that followed, I tried to move on, to convince myself that it was all over. But the psychological scars ran deeper than I expected. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows set my mind spiraling back to that moment when I realized I wasn't alone. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, always on edge, always looking over my shoulder. The haunting feeling that he could come back. Someone else could invade my space, never truly went away. Therapy helped, to some extent. I talked through my fears, tried to rationalize them. The trauma had left its mark. Even now, years later, I still struggle with the remnants of that night. It's eerie how something so brief can have such a lasting impact. how one terrifying encounter can change the way you see the world. I've since moved to a new place, but I still find myself double-checking locks, scanning rooms, and listening for any sign of an intruder. The most chilling part, though, is knowing that it could happen again. No matter how much time passes, that fear never truly fades. I've learned to live with it, to manage it, but it's always there, lurking in the background, like a shadow that refuses to disappear. I've come to accept that some experiences leave permanent scars. All you can do is try to move forward, one day at a time, even if the past continues to haunt you. So here I am, sharing my story with you, not to scare you, but to remind you to stay vigilant. It's easy to think that something like this could never happen to you, but I've learned the hard way that life doesn't always follow the rules we set. Sometimes the unexpected barges in uninvited, and all we can do is be prepared. Because when the eerie quiet of the night is shattered by the sound of an intruder, not just your home that's invaded, it's your peace of mind too. It started with small noises, just faint enough to be brushed off as the house settling, or perhaps the pipes groaning with age. I didn't think much of it at first, even though the sounds seemed to come from the basement. It wasn't until the noises grew more frequent, more distinct, that I began to feel uneasy. The thought of someone living down there, in the dark, unseen, sent chills down my spine. But I couldn't shake the feeling, so I finally decided to investigate, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and a shaky resolve, I descended the creaky stairs to the basement. The air was thick, musty, and the further I went, the more oppressive the darkness became. Every step echoed ominously, amplifying my growing dread. I paused at the bottom, straining to hear anything that might give away the presence of another person. For a moment, there was nothing, just an eerie silence. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of breathing, low and ragged, coming from the far corner of the room. My heart pounded in my chest as I swung the flashlight toward the source of the noise. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a makeshift bed hidden behind a stack of old boxes. My stomach turned as I realized someone had been living down here for weeks, maybe even longer. Clothes were strewn about, and there were remnants of food wrappers scattered on the floor. The air was thick with the stench of decay and unwashed bodies. The horror of the situation hit me like a wave, and I backed away, desperate to escape. But before I could make it back to the stairs, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was gaunt, unkempt, with wild eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. Panic surged through me as I realized there was no easy way out. He moved toward me slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the terror in my eyes. I could see the madness in his expression, the twisted satisfaction of knowing he'd been watching me all this time, unseen and unheard. It was a haunting realization, and I knew I had to act fast. I bolted for the stairs, my footsteps pounding against the wooden steps as I raced for the door. But he was faster, grabbing me by the ankle and pulling me back down. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of me, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But adrenaline kicked in, and I managed to kick him off and scramble to my feet. I didn't look back as I sprinted up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, my hands shaking as I called the police, my voice trembling with fear. The police arrived quickly, but by the time they searched the basement, he was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the remnants of his life in the shadows. The thought of him still out there, lurking, sent a shiver down my spine. They told me it wasn't uncommon for squatters to hide in basements, but that did little to comfort me. The thought that someone had been living beneath my feet, watching me, knowing my every move, haunted me for days. I couldn't stay in the house after that. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, filled me with dread. I kept imagining him creeping back in, hiding in the basement, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was a chilling thought, and I knew I'd never feel safe there again. So I packed my things and left, hoping to leave the horror behind me. But even now, in my new home, I can't help but check the basement every night before I go to bed. The psychological toll was immense. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was lurking just out of sight, waiting to make their move. The experience changed me, made me more cautious, more paranoid. I double-checked every lock, every window, every night, unable to relax until I was sure I was alone. But the fear never really went away, clung to me, a haunting reminder of what had happened in that dark, musty basement. Sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the sound of breathing in the back of my mind. It's a sound that haunts me, that reminds me of how close I came to losing everything. And even though I know it's all in my head, I can't help but feel like he's still out there somewhere, waiting. Maybe it's irrational, but after what I went through, I've learned that it's better to be safe than sorry. So I remain vigilant, always on guard, always listening for that telltale sound of someone living where they shouldn't be. In the end, I've come to accept that some experiences leave scars that never fully heal. The fear of the unknown, of the unseen, is something I've learned to live with. It's eerie how much one event can change your entire outlook on life, how it can make you question everything you once took for granted. But I've also learned to be stronger, to trust my instincts, and to never ignore the signs when something doesn't feel right. Because sometimes, the monsters aren't just in our heads, they're hiding in the basement. I returned home late that evening, exhausted from a long day and eager to unwind. But as I approached the front door, something felt off. The door was slightly ajar, not fully closed as I had left it that morning. A chill ran down my spine as I hesitated on the threshold. Had I forgotten to lock it? No, I was sure I had. The eerie thought that someone had been inside while I was away crept into my mind. My pulse quickened, and I knew I had to investigate. Stepping inside cautiously, I scanned the darkened room, my senses heightened. Everything seemed normal at first glance, no signs of a break-in, no obvious disturbances. But the unsettling feeling wouldn't leave me. The silence was too thick, too heavy. As I moved further into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, lurking just out of sight. My breath hitched as I noticed a faint shadow shift in the corner of my vision. I wasn't alone. Panic surged through me as I realized the intruder was still inside. I couldn't make a sound, couldn't alert them to my presence. My mind raced, searching for an escape plan. Should I run? Hide? Confront them? Every option seemed fraught with danger. My only chance was to outwit them, to stay one step ahead. But how? The situation was chilling, like something out of a nightmare, and I knew that one wrong move could be my last. I inched toward the back door, trying to keep my movements as quiet as possible. But just as I reached for the handle, a floorboard creaked behind me. My blood ran cold. I spun around, and there he was, figure standing in the doorway, blocking my escape. His face was obscured by the shadows, but I could feel the malice radiating from him. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. It was haunting, the way he seemed to relish the fear in my eyes. In that moment, I knew I had to act fast. My survival instincts kicked in. I lunged for the nearest object, a heavy lamp on the side table. I swung it with all my might, catching him off guard. The lamp shattered against his head, and he stumbled back, momentarily disoriented. It was the opening I needed. I dashed past him, heading for the front door. But he recovered quickly, grabbing my arm and pulling me back. We struggled, each of us fighting for control, the air thick with tension. Desperation fueled my strength, and I managed to break free, sprinting toward the door. I threw it open and ran into the night, not stopping until I reached a neighbor's house. My heart pounded in my chest as I frantically explained what had happened. The police arrived shortly after, and they searched the house, but the intruder was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the memory of his chilling presence. The police assured me they would keep an eye out, but the encounter left me shaken. The psychological toll was immense. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind, sent my mind spiraling back to that moment when I realized I wasn't alone. I couldn't stay in the house after that. Fear of him returning, being trapped again, haunted me. I moved out shortly after, leaving behind the place that had once been my safe haven, but had become a prison of terror. Even now, in a new home, I still feel the lingering effects of that night. I double-check every lock, every window, and sleep with a bat by my bed. The haunting memory of being trapped with no way out is something that never truly fades. It's eerie how quickly your sense of security can be shattered, how easily the familiar can become frightening. But I've learned to live with it, to carry on despite the fear that sometimes creeps up on me in the dead of night. I've become more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. I no longer take my safety for granted. The experience changed me, made me more vigilant, but also more resilient. I refuse to let fear control my life, even though it's always there, lurking in the background. I've come to accept that some encounters leave scars that never fully heal, but they also make you stronger. And in the end, that's what matters: surviving, overcoming, and never letting the darkness win. It was a nightmare that had plagued me for years, the fear that something was lurking under the bed, waiting to strike when I least expected it. I had always chalked it up to childhood imagination, the product of too many scary stories before bedtime. One night, that fear became all too real. I remember waking up in the dead of night, the room shrouded in darkness, and hearing a faint, almost imperceptible sound coming from beneath the bed. My heart pounded as I strained to listen, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the sound persisted, growing louder as if something, or someone, was shifting under the bed. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Every instinct screamed at me to stay still, to not look, but curiosity and fear drove me to peek over the edge of the bed. What I saw sent a chilling wave of terror through my entire body. There, barely visible in the dim light, was a pair of eyes staring back at me from the darkness beneath the bed. For a moment, I was frozen in place, unable to process what I was seeing. Those eyes, wild, hungry, and unblinking, belonged to a stranger, someone who had been hiding there, watching me sleep. The eerie realization that this wasn't just a nightmare, this was real, hit me like a ton of bricks. My mind raced with thoughts of how long he had been there, how he had gotten in, and what he planned to do next. I had never felt so vulnerable, so utterly trapped in my own room. I knew I had to act quickly. My first instinct was to scream for help, but the fear of provoking him into action kept my voice trapped in my throat. Instead, I slowly slid off the bed, careful not to make any sudden movements that might alert him. My heart was pounding so loudly that I was sure he could hear it. As soon as my feet touched the floor, I bolted for the door, adrenaline propelling me forward. I didn't dare look back, terrified of what I might see if I did. I slammed the door behind me and ran down the hall, yelling for my parents. They rushed out of their room, confused and alarmed, and I breathlessly explained what had happened. My father grabbed a baseball bat and cautiously approached my room while my mother called the police. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity, the suspense and fear hanging thick in the air. When the police arrived, they searched the room, and to everyone's horror, they found him still hiding under the bed, clutching a knife. The police arrested him, and the details that emerged afterward were terrifying. He had been watching me for weeks, stalking me, waiting for the right moment to strike. The thought that he had been in my room, mere inches from where I slept, sent shivers down my spine. It was a chilling reminder that the monsters we fear as children sometimes exist in the real world. The psychological impact was immense. Sleep became nearly impossible, and every creak of the house filled me with dread. Even after the intruder was gone, fear lingered. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in that room again, not with the haunting memory of those eyes watching me from the darkness. We moved shortly after, but the trauma followed me. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, always checking under the bed, in closets, and behind doors before allowing myself to relax. The experience had left a permanent mark, constant reminder of how fragile our sense of safety can be. Over time, therapy helped me process the trauma, but the fear never truly left. It's eerie how one night can change your life forever, how one encounter can shatter your sense of security. I've learned to cope, to manage the anxiety, but I'll never forget the sight of those eyes staring back at me from the darkness. It's a haunting image that stays with me, a reminder that sometimes the nightmares we fear as children aren't just in our heads. They're real, and they're lurking closer than we think. Now I make sure to stay vigilant, to never let my guard down, even in the safety of my own home. It's a hard lesson learned, but it's one that has made me stronger, more resilient. I've come to accept that some fears never truly go away, but they don't have to control you. You can take back your power, even in the face of darkness, and ensure that those chilling memories don't define you. But I'll always remember that night, the terror of realizing that the monster under the bed was real, and that I survived it. We thought we were being smart by hiding a spare key under the flower pot by the front door. After all, it was just a small town, and nothing ever happened here. At least, that's what we told ourselves. But that sense of security was shattered the night we came home from a night out and found the door slightly ajar. At first, we thought maybe we had forgotten to close it properly in our hurry to leave. But as we stepped inside, the eerie silence told us something was very, very wrong. The house felt different, as if someone had disturbed the air, leaving behind a chilling presence that lingered in every corner. We glanced at each other, a silent agreement passing between us to check the rooms. It wasn't long before we realized that someone had been inside. The cushions on the couch were displaced, drawers left half open, and a few personal items were missing. But what truly sent shivers down our spines was the realization the spare key was gone. Someone had found it, used it, and had been inside our home. Panic set in as we rushed to check the rest of the house. The thought that the intruder might still be inside was terrifying. We moved from room to room, our footsteps echoing ominously in the silence. Every shadow seemed to hide something sinister. Every creak of the floorboards made our hearts race. When we reached the bedroom, the door was closed, which was strange because we never left it that way. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, and when I pushed it open, the sight that greeted us was haunting. There he was, standing by the window, staring out as if he belonged there. The man turned slowly, his gaze locking onto us with a look of cold detachment. He didn't say a word, just stood there, as if daring us to make the first move. The silence was suffocating, and for a moment, none of us moved. Then, without warning, he lunged toward us, sending us scrambling backward. We barely had time to react as he bolted past us, disappearing into the night, leaving behind a chilling sense of violation. Police arrived quickly. By then, the intruder was long gone. They told us it was likely a random break-in, someone who had seen us leave and found the spare key. But that explanation did little to ease our fears. The idea that someone had been inside our home, rifling through our belongings, knowing our routines, was terrifying. We changed the locks the very next day. The psychological damage had already been done. Every noise, every shadow became a potential threat, and sleep was hard to come by. In the days that followed, the trauma lingered. We couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, knowing that someone had invaded our most private space. The memory of that night, of seeing the intruder standing there so calmly, haunted us. It was a chilling reminder that no matter how safe you think you are, there's always a possibility that someone can find a way in. We became hyper-vigilant, checking every lock, every window, every night before going to bed. But the fear never truly went away. Eventually, we moved to a new place, hoping to leave the haunting memories behind. But the experience had changed us. We no longer trusted the security of simple locks and hidden keys. We installed an advanced security system, complete with cameras and motion detectors, but even that wasn't enough to fully erase the lingering anxiety. It's eerie how one night, one breach of trust, can change the way you see the world. We learned to be more cautious, more aware of our surroundings, but the fear remained, lurking in the background. Over time, we've learned to live with the memories, to manage the fear, but the experience has left a permanent mark. The thought of someone else finding a way in, of using a hidden key to invade our lives, is a haunting one. It's a reminder that no matter how careful you are, there are always vulnerabilities, always ways for danger to slip through the cracks. But we've also learned to be stronger, to not let that fear control us. Because in the end, it's not just about keeping others out. It's about reclaiming your sense of safety, no matter how chilling the past may be. It was one of those nights where everything seemed perfect. Relaxing on the couch, headphones on, completely lost in my favorite music. The world outside faded away as I drifted into my own little world, oblivious to everything around me. That's probably why I didn't hear the front door creak open, or the soft footsteps padding across the floor. I was so absorbed in the music that I didn't notice the chilling presence that had silently entered my home. It wasn't until I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye that the illusion shattered. I froze, my heart skipping a beat as I slowly removed my headphone. The room was eerily quiet, and for a moment I wondered if I had imagined it. But then I saw him, a man standing in the doorway, his face obscured by shadows. My breath hitched, and I instinctively reached for my phone, but it was too far away. I had no idea how long he had been standing there watching me, waiting. The silence in the room became deafening, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. He hadn't noticed that I'd seen him yet, though I knew I had to be careful. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. If I made a sound, if I alerted him to the fact that I knew he was there, it could all be over. Slowly, I began to slide off the couch, inching toward the back door. Every movement felt excruciatingly slow, the air heavy with fear. My pulse pounded in my ears as I moved, desperately hoping he wouldn't notice. But then, as I reached the door, creak in the floorboard betrayed me. His head snapped toward me, and in that moment, I knew I had no choice but to run. I bolted out the door, not stopping to see if he was following. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't slow down, my only thought being to get as far away from the house as possible. I could hear his footsteps behind me, gaining on me, and the terror of knowing he was right there so close was overwhelming. I dashed into the street, frantically waving down a passing car, hoping someone would stop. The car screeched to a halt and I scrambled inside, breathless and trembling. The driver, an older woman, looked at me with wide eyes as I babbled about the intruder. She immediately called the police, and we sped away, leaving the house and the man behind. The police arrived soon after, but the intruder was gone. It was as if he had vanished into the night, leaving behind only the haunting memory of those few, terrifying moments. The experience left me shaken. The safety of my home shattered. I couldn't go back to the house that night. The thought of returning to the place where he had silently invaded my life was too much to bear. Even after the locks were changed and security cameras installed, I never felt truly safe there again. Every shadow, every creak, every silence felt ominous, like a reminder that he could come back at any time. The eerie memory of him standing there, watching me without making a sound, haunted me for weeks. Eventually, I moved away, hoping to escape the fear that had taken root in my mind. But the psychological scars remain. I became hyper-vigilant, constantly on edge, always listening for the slightest sound. The experience had changed me, made me more aware of how vulnerable we can be in our own homes. The chilling reality that someone could slip in unnoticed, could be standing right behind you without you even knowing, was something I could never forget. Over time, I've learned to manage the fear, to not let it control my life. But the haunting memory of that night lingers, a reminder that safety is often an illusion. I've become more cautious, more careful, but also more resilient. Because in the end, surviving something like that makes you stronger, even if it leaves you with scars. And I've learned that sometimes the silence can be just as terrifying as the noise, especially when you know that silence is hiding something, or someone sinister. It started with little things. A book out of place, a door left ajar, a chair moved slightly from where I'd left it. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful. Maybe I had moved the book or left the door open in my rush to get to work. But the more it happened, the more unsettling it became. Something wasn't right. The changes were subtle, almost imperceptible, but they were there. It was as if someone had been in my house, rearranging things in the most chillingly quiet way possible. I began to doubt my sanity, wondering if I was imagining it all. But then, one night, I came home and found a photograph on the kitchen table, one that I hadn't put there. It was an old picture of me, taken years ago, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Someone had been in my house, going through my things, and they wanted me to know it. The realization was haunting, and I felt a creeping sense of dread every time I walked through the front door. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I installed new locks, set up a security system, and even bought a dog for protection. But the unsettling changes continued. It was as if the intruder was playing a game with me, haunting me with his ability to slip in and out unnoticed. The psychological toll was immense. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work, always waiting for the next sign that he had been there. The fear of not knowing who he was or what he wanted gnawed at me constantly. Then, one night, I decided to catch him in the act. I stayed up late, hiding in the darkened living room, waiting for any sign of movement. The hours ticked by, and just when I was about to give up, I heard it. A faint creak of the floorboards. My heart raced as I peered into the shadows, straining to see anything out of place. And then, I saw him, a figure slipping through the hallway, moving silently, methodically. I froze, unable to believe what I was seeing. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched as he made his way through the house, touching things, rearranging them as if it were his own. It was eerie, the way he seemed so at ease, so confident that I wouldn't catch him. But this time, I was ready. I called the police, whispering into the phone as I kept my eyes on him. They arrived within minutes, and the sight of the flashing lights sent him bolting for the back door. But they caught him before he could escape, dragging him out in handcuffs. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but it was quickly overshadowed by the chilling realization of how close I had come to confronting him alone. The police told me he had been stalking me for months, watching my every move, breaking in while I slept. The thought of it sent shivers down my spine. I had been living with a ghost, a shadow that haunted my every waking moment. Even with him gone, the psychological damage lingered. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows felt like a reminder that he had been there. I moved out of the house shortly after, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The experience had changed me, made me more cautious, more aware of how vulnerable we can be in our own homes. The haunting memory of him slipping through the shadows, rearranging my life like a puzzle, is something I'll never forget. It's eerie how one person can have such a profound impact on your sense of security, how they can make you question everything you once took for granted. Even now, in a new place, I can't fully relax. The fear of someone else slipping in unnoticed, playing the same haunting game, is always there, lurking in the background. But I've learned to live with it, not let it control me. Because in the end, surviving something like that makes you stronger, more resilient. And I've come to accept that sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones that jump out at you. They're the ones that slip through the cracks, unnoticed, until it's too late. I woke up to the sound of the wind howling outside, rattling the windows in their frames. It was still dark, the kind of darkness that presses in from all sides, making the familiar seem strange and eerie. As I groggily opened my eyes, I noticed something was off. The room felt colder than usual, and when I turned to look at the window, my heart skipped a beat. It was wide open, the curtains billowing in the wind. I knew I hadn't left it open before going to bed, and the chilling thought that someone else had sent shivers down my spine. I sat up slowly, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of the situation. Had the wind blown it open? Or had someone been in my room while I slept? The latter thought was too terrifying to fully comprehend, but I couldn't ignore the signs. My bedside table was slightly askew, and a few items that had been on it were now on the floor. Someone had been in my room. The eerie realization made my skin crawl, and I knew I had to get out of there, fast. But as I moved to get out of bed, I heard a noise. Soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. It was coming from the hallway, just outside my door. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the intruder was still in the house. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Couldn't let them know I was awake. Slowly, I slid out of bed, careful not to make a sound, and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. My fingers trembled as I dialed 911, whispering my address to the operator. The operator told me to stay on the line, but I knew I couldn't just sit there and wait. The intruder was too close, too dangerous. I had to find a way out. I glanced toward the door, my only escape route, but the thought of confronting whoever was out there filled me with dread. I could hear them moving around, their footsteps slow and deliberate, as if they were searching for something or someone. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my decision. I would have to face them. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and opened the door. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I could see a shadowy figure at the end of the hall, rummaging through my belongings. The sight of them there, so brazen and unafraid, sent a wave of fear through me. But I couldn't let that fear paralyze me. I had to act. I grabbed the closest object, a heavy vase, and hurled it at them with all my strength. The vase shattered against the wall, startling the intruder. They spun around, their face masked by shadows, and for a split second, we were both frozen in place. Then, they bolted for the front door, and I followed, desperate to make sure they left. By the time the police arrived, the intruder was long gone, leaving behind only the unsettling memory of their presence. The police searched the house, but there was no sign of forced entry, no clue as to how they had gotten in, or why they had targeted me. In the days that followed, the psychological toll became apparent. I couldn't sleep, couldn't relax, always listening for the sound of footsteps or the creak of a door. The open window became a symbol of my vulnerability, a haunting reminder that someone had invaded my personal space while I was at my most defenseless. I installed new locks, double-checked every window, and even got a security system. The fear never truly went away. Eventually, I moved to a new place, hoping to leave the eerie memories behind. But the experience had changed me. I became more cautious, more aware of my surroundings, always on guard. The thought that someone could slip in through an open window, would be standing just outside your door, waiting, is a chilling one. It's a reminder that no matter how safe you think you are, there's always a way for danger to find you. And even though I've moved on, I still can't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, is watching. It started with a phone call late one night. I was just about to fall asleep when the phone rang, the sound cutting through the quiet like a knife. Groggily I answered, expecting it to be a wrong number, but what I heard on the other end made my blood run cold. A low, distorted voice whispered, "I'm watching you." My heart skipped a beat as I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. Glanced around the dark room, trying to convince myself it was just a prank, but the fear gnawing at my gut told me otherwise. I hung up quickly, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over me. But just as I began to relax, the phone rang again. This time, I didn't answer. The call went to voicemail, and I could hear the same distorted voice leaving a chilling message. "I know where you are. I'm closer than you think." My hands trembled as I deleted the message, trying to push the fear out of my mind. But it wasn't that easy. The thought that someone was out there, watching me, filled me with a deep sense of dread. Calls continued over the next few days, each one more disturbing than the last. The voice on the other end seemed to know everything about me, where I lived, what I did during the day, even what I was wearing. It was as if they were inside my house, observing my every move. The thought was terrifying, and I became paranoid, constantly checking over my shoulder, double-locking doors and closing curtains. But the calls didn't stop. If anything, they became more frequent, more intense. One night, after another round of disturbing calls, I heard something outside my window. It was faint, like the sound of someone shifting their weight on the grass. My heart raced as I peeked through the curtains, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. That's when I received the final call. The voice whispered, "I'm here." The words sent a jolt of terror through me, and I knew I had to get out of the house. I grabbed my phone and bolted for the door, not bothering to grab anything else. As I reached the front door, I saw a shadowy figure standing in the hallway, blocking my escape. The fear that gripped me was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was suffocating, overwhelming. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, desperate to find another way out. But no matter where I went, it felt like the walls were closing in on me, trapping me inside my own home. The voice on the phone had become a living nightmare, and now, that nightmare was real. I finally made it to the back door, throwing it open and sprinting into the night. Cold air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop running until I reached a neighbor's house. They let me in, and I called the police, my voice trembling with fear. When the officers arrived, they searched my house, but the intruder was gone. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air, leaving behind no trace of their presence. The psychological damage had already been done. In the weeks that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The anonymous calls had stopped. The fear lingered, haunting my every move. Every time the phone rang, my heart skipped a beat, and every shadow seemed to hide something sinister. The experience had left a deep scar, one that wouldn't easily heal. I moved out of the house, hoping to leave the chilling memories behind. The fear followed me wherever I went. Over time, I've learned to cope with the trauma. The memory of those calls still haunts me. It's eerie how a voice on the other end of the line can have such a profound impact, how it can make you question everything you thought you knew about safety. I've become more cautious, more aware of my surroundings, but the fear of the unknown, of the unseen, always there, lurking in the background. And I've come to accept that some things, no matter how hard you try to forget, will always stay with you. It was just another ordinary day when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw a man dressed in a utility worker's uniform, complete with a badge and clipboard. He seemed harmless enough, so I opened the door, assuming he was here to check on something or fix a problem. He explained that there had been reports of a gas leak in the area, and that he needed to inspect the lines inside the house. His calm demeanor put me at ease, and I let him in without a second thought. But as he moved through the house, something felt off. He wasn't checking the gas lines like I expected. He was more interested in the layout of the rooms, asking questions that seemed unrelated to his supposed job. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that something wasn't right. The more he talked, the more his story began to unravel, and the creeping sense of dread that had been gnawing at me became impossible to ignore. I tried to remain calm, but the eerie feeling that I had made a terrible mistake wouldn't leave me. I decided to test him, asking specific questions about the gas company and the supposed leak. His answers were vague, and he started to get defensive, calm facades slipping. That's when I knew for sure he wasn't who he claimed to be. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to think of a way to get him out of the house without raising suspicion. I casually mentioned that I needed to make a phone call, hoping to buy myself some time, but he suddenly turned on me, his demeanor shifting from polite to menacing. He blocked my path, his eyes cold and calculating. "You're not calling anyone," he said, his voice low and threatening. My stomach dropped, and I knew I was in serious danger. The realization that I had let this man into my home, that I had given him access to my private space, was terrifying. I needed to get out, but every exit seemed blocked, every escape route cut off. The walls of the house, once a safe haven, now felt like a prison, and I was trapped inside with a dangerous man. Desperation fueled my actions, and I lunged for the nearest object, a vase on the table, and smashed it against his head. The impact stunned him, and I took the opportunity to make a run for it. I dashed out the door, my heart racing as I sprinted down the street, yelling for help. A neighbor heard me and called the police, and within minutes they arrived, apprehending the impersonator before he could escape. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but it was quickly overshadowed by the haunting realization of how close I had come to real danger. The police later told me that he had been posing as a utility worker for weeks, targeting homes and gaining entry under false pretenses. The thought that I had been one of his potential victims, that I had narrowly escaped whatever plans he had, left me shaken. The psychological toll was immense. Every knock at the door, every stranger in a uniform, filled me with dread. I became hyper-vigilant, questioning everyone who came to the house, never trusting anyone at face value again. The experience left a deep scar, one that didn't easily heal. I installed security cameras, changed the locks, and became more cautious than ever before. The fear lingered, haunting my every interaction with strangers. It's eerie how quickly someone can shatter your sense of safety. How one encounter can make you question everything you thought you knew about the world. I've learned to live with the fear, to manage it, but I'll never forget the day I let danger into my home. In the end, I've come to accept that some experiences leave lasting marks, scars that never fully fade. But they also make you stronger, more resilient. I've learned to trust my instincts, to never ignore that gut feeling when something doesn't seem right. And while I've moved on from that terrifying encounter, I've also learned to be more cautious, more aware. Because in a world where people can so easily disguise themselves as something they're not, you can never be too careful. I had always felt safe in my home, sanctuary away from the chaos of the outside world. But that sense of security was shattered the day I discovered a hidden camera tucked discreetly in the corner of my living room. I only found it by accident while rearranging furniture. First, I didn't believe what I was seeing. Who would be watching me and why? The realization that someone had been spying on my every move was chilling, and my mind raced with questions and fear. I immediately called the police, but as I waited for them to arrive, I couldn't help but wonder how long the camera had been there. Days? Weeks? Longer? The thought of someone watching me in my most private moments sent shivers down my spine. I began to search the rest of the house, and to my horror, I found more cameras, one in the bedroom, another in the bathroom. It was as if my life had been turned into a twisted reality show, and I was the unwilling star. Police arrived and confirmed my worst fears. Someone had been monitoring me. They couldn't tell for how long or who was responsible. The violation of my privacy was overwhelming, and the psychological impact was immense. Every room in the house felt tainted, every corner hiding a dark secret. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, even after the cameras were removed. The experience was haunting, and I knew I would never feel truly safe in my own home again. I decided to stay with a friend while the investigation continued, but the fear followed me. The thought that someone had been so close, so intimate with my life without my knowledge, made it hard to trust anyone. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, constantly checking for hidden devices, always looking over my shoulder. Police eventually identified the culprit, an ex-tenant who had kept access to the house after moving out, but the relief of knowing who it was didn't erase the damage done. In the end, I moved to a new place, hoping to leave the haunting memories behind. The experience changed me. I became more cautious, more guarded, always questioning whether I was truly alone. The violation of my privacy was a scar that never fully healed, and it was a chilling reminder that you can never be too careful. The haunting memory of being watched, of having my life invaded without my knowledge, is something I carry with me every day. And while I've moved on, I'll never forget the lesson I learned. Trust is fragile, and sometimes the walls that protect us aren't as solid as we think. Renting out a room in my house seemed like a good idea at the time, a way to make some extra money and help someone in need of a place to stay. The tenant I chose seemed nice enough, polite and quiet, but as the weeks went by, little things began to bother me. He would lock himself in his room for hours, barely speaking to anyone, and strange noises would come from behind his door at odd hours of the night. The more I noticed, the more uneasy I became. Something wasn't right. It all came to a head one night when I heard loud banging coming from his room. I knocked on the door, asking if everything was okay, but there was no response. My concern turned to fear as the noises continued. Thumps, scraping sounds, and what sounded like muffled voices. I tried the doorknob, but it was locked. Panic set in, and I called the police, my heart racing as I waited for them to arrive. The situation was chilling, and I had no idea what I would find on the other side of that door. When the police finally broke down the door, what we found was horrifying. The room was a mess, with strange symbols painted on the walls, and bizarre objects scattered everywhere. The tenant was gone, but what he had left behind was terrifying. The police later told me that he had been involved in some sort of cult activity, using my home as a base for his sinister plans. The thought that I had been living under the same roof as someone so dangerous was haunting, and it left me shaken to the core. I couldn't stay in the house after that. The psychological impact was too great. The sense of violation, of danger lurking just behind the door, was overwhelming. I moved out as soon as I could, but the fear followed me. Every noise, every shadow, filled me with dread. The experience had changed me, made me more cautious, more wary of the people I let into my life. The chilling memory of that night, of what could have happened, is something I'll never forget. In the end, I learned a hard lesson about trust and the dangers of letting strangers into your home. The experience left a permanent mark on me, a reminder that you can never truly know what someone is capable of. I've become more guarded, more careful. The fear never really goes away. It's eerie how one bad decision can change your life forever. How it can make you question everything you thought you knew about the world. But I've learned to live with it and to never take my safety for granted again. The knock on the door was sharp and authoritative, and when I looked through the peephole, I saw a man in a police uniform standing on my doorstep. He flashed a badge, said there had been a break-in in the neighborhood, and that he needed to ask me a few questions. It all seemed so routine, so normal. I didn't think twice about letting him in. But as soon as he crossed the threshold, something felt off. His eyes darted around the room, and his demeanor shifted from professional to unsettlingly intense. He asked strange questions, things that didn't seem relevant to a break-in. My unease grew as he walked through the house, his gaze lingering on things that had nothing to do with his supposed investigation. The more he talked, the more I realized that something was very wrong. My instincts screamed at me to get him out, but I didn't want to provoke him. The situation was chilling, and I felt trapped, unsure of how to handle the growing sense of danger. I tried to remain calm, answering his questions as best I could while subtly inching toward the door. But when I mentioned calling the police station to confirm his identity, his demeanor changed completely. He became aggressive, insisting that there was no need to involve anyone else. That's when I knew for sure. He wasn't a real officer. My heart raced as I tried to think of a way to escape. I managed to excuse myself, saying I needed to use the bathroom, and once I was out of sight, I grabbed my phone and called 911. Police arrived within minutes, and the man bolted as soon as he saw the flashing lights. They caught him a few blocks away, and it turned out he had been posing as a police officer, gained entry into people's homes, and robbed them. Thought that I had let him into my house, that I had been so close to danger, it's terrifying. Psychological impact was immense. I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability, fear that someone could so easily deceive me and invade my space. Even after he was caught, fear lingered. Every time I saw a police officer, I questioned whether they were who they claimed to be. The experience had shaken my trust in people, made me more cautious, more suspicious. I installed new locks, added security cameras, and became hyper-vigilant. But the fear never really went away. It's eerie how one encounter can change your perspective, how it can make you question everything you thought you knew about safety and trust. In the end, I learned a valuable lesson. Never let your guard down, even with those who seem trustworthy. The experience left a deep scar, but it also made me stronger, more aware. I've come to accept that some fears never fully disappear, but they don't have to control you. And while I've moved on from that terrifying encounter, I'll always be more cautious, more careful, because in a world where appearances can be deceiving, you can never be too careful. I had always been proud of my smart home setup. Everything from the lights to the security system could be controlled with a simple tap on my phone. It made life convenient and gave me a sense of security, knowing that my home was always protected. But that sense of safety was shattered the day I realized someone had hacked into my system. It started with small things: lights flickering on and off, doors locking and unlocking by themselves. At first, I thought it was a glitch, but then I received a message on my phone: "I'm in control now." Panic set in as I tried to regain access to my system, but every attempt was blocked. The intruder had taken over everything: lights, locks, cameras. I was trapped in my own home, unable to control anything. The realization that someone was watching me, controlling my environment, was chilling. I could hear the locks clicking, the lights flickering, all under the control of someone else. It felt like I was in a nightmare, and I couldn't wake up. Desperation took over as I tried to find a way out. The windows were locked, the doors sealed shut, and every time I moved, the cameras followed me, tracking my every step. The hacker was toying with me, making sure I knew they were in control. It was eerie how they seemed to anticipate my every move, cutting off every escape route before I could even attempt it. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, and the fear was suffocating. Finally, I managed to reach out to a friend, called the police on my behalf. They arrived quickly, but even they couldn't immediately regain control of the system. It took hours of work to finally lock the hacker out and restore my access. The experience left me shaken, the psychological impact profound. My home, once a place of safety and comfort, now felt like a trap. The fear of being watched, of having my life controlled by someone else, was haunting. I dismantled the smart home system after that, going back to the basics. Manual locks, no cameras, no remote control. Convenience wasn't worth the terror I had experienced. The experience had changed me, made me more cautious, more aware of the vulnerabilities that come with modern technology. Chilling memory of being trapped, having my home turned against me, is something I'll never forget. And while I've moved on, I'll always be wary of the unseen dangers that can lurk in the digital world. Living with a roommate seemed like a good idea at first, splitting the rent, sharing the chores, and having someone around to keep the loneliness at bay. My roommate was friendly, polite, and kept to themselves most of the time. But as the weeks went by, little things started to bother me. I'd catch them staring at me when they thought I wasn't looking, and I'd find my belongings slightly moved, as if someone had been going through them. The unease grew, but I tried to brush it off. After all, we lived together. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But the turning point came one night, and I found a notebook in their room while borrowing a pen. I didn't mean to snoop, but curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. What I found inside was terrifying. Pages upon pages of detailed notes about me. My habits, my routines, even personal details that I had never shared. The obsession was chilling, and the realization that they had been watching me so closely, so intently, made my skin crawl. I confronted them about it, but they brushed it off as harmless curiosity, insisting that it was all just a misunderstanding. But the intensity of their gaze, the way they refused to break eye contact, told me otherwise. The situation was becoming dangerous, and I knew I had to get out. That night, I packed a bag and left, staying with a friend until I could figure out what to do next. The fear of what my roommate might do, how far their obsession might go, was overwhelming. I moved out the next day, breaking the lease and cutting off all contact. The psychological impact remained. The thought that someone had been so fixated on me, that they had been living under the same roof, watching my every move, was haunting. I became hyper-vigilant, always checking my surroundings, always questioning the motives of those around me. The experience had changed me, made me more guarded, more cautious. Even now, I struggle to trust others, always fearing that there might be another hidden obsession lurking beneath the surface. Chilling memory of finding that notebook, of realizing how deeply my roommate had infiltrated my life is something I'll never forget. It's a reminder that you can never truly know what someone is thinking, what they might be capable of. And while I've moved on, fear lingers, constant shadow in the back of my mind. It was late, and I had just finished a long shift at work. All I wanted to do was fill up my gas tank and get home. The gas station was nearly empty, just me and one other car parked at the far end of the lot. I didn't think much of it as I pulled up to the pump and started filling my tank. But as I finished and got back into my car, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Before I could react, the passenger door flew open, and a man slid into the seat beside me. His hand was on my arm, gripping tightly, and his voice was low and menacing as he told me to drive. Panic surged through me, but I knew I had to stay calm. The fear that gripped me was unlike anything I had ever felt before. I was trapped, with no way out, and the car that had once felt like a safe haven now felt like a prison. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way to escape. Every option seemed too dangerous, too risky. He directed me out of the gas station and onto the dark, deserted roads. The silence in the car was suffocating, the tension so thick it was almost unbearable. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity, and the fear of what he might do next consumed me. But then, as we approached a red light, I saw my chance. Without warning, I slammed on the brakes, throwing the car into park and jumping out before he could react. I ran into the middle of the street, waving down the nearest car, desperate for help. The driver of the other car stopped, and I scrambled inside, breathless and terrified. They called the police, and we sped away, leaving the carjacker behind. Police found my car abandoned a few miles down the road. The man was long gone. The experience left me shaken, the psychological impact profound. Every time I got into my car after that, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of someone waiting to strike. The chilling memory of that night, of being trapped with a dangerous stranger, haunted me. I became hyper-vigilant, always checking the back seat, always locking the doors as soon as I got inside. The fear of another encounter, being trapped again, never really went away. It's eerie how one moment, one decision can change your life forever. The experience made me more cautious, more aware, but it also left me with scars that will never fully heal. And while I've moved on, I'll never forget the fear of that night and the lesson I learned. Never let your guard down, even in the most ordinary of places. It was supposed to be a routine delivery, just another package dropped off at my door. I wasn't expecting anything, but that wasn't unusual. Sometimes I'd forget about something I ordered online, only to be pleasantly surprised when it arrived. But this time, the package wasn't a pleasant surprise. The box was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address. A sense of unease settled over me as I picked it up. The curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to open it. What I found inside was horrifying. Instead of the usual contents of a package, clothes, books, or gadgets, there was something far more sinister. The sight of it made my stomach churn, and I quickly closed the box, my hands trembling. I didn't know who had sent it or why, but the message was clear. Someone was targeting me. The realization that this wasn't just a random delivery, but something deliberately meant to frighten me, sent a chilling wave of fear through my body. I immediately called the police, came to investigate. They took the package as evidence, but they couldn't tell me who had sent it or why. The experience left me shaken, the psychological impact immense. Every knock at the door, every delivery, filled me with dread. The fear of receiving another package, of being targeted again, haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. As the days passed, the fear didn't subside. I became hypervigilant, always on edge, always expecting the worst. Every noise, every shadow, felt like a threat. Chilling memory of that package, of the horror it contained, stayed with me. Constant reminder that danger could arrive at my doorstep at any moment. I changed my routines, took extra precautions, but the fear never really went away. Eerie how one delivery, one moment, can turn your life upside down. In the end, I learned a hard lesson about trust and the vulnerability of everyday life. The experience left a deep scar, one that didn't easily heal. I became more cautious, more guarded, always questioning the motives of those around me. The fear of being targeted again, of receiving another sinister package, never fully left me. And while I've moved on, I'll never forget the lesson I learned, that even the most ordinary of events can have chilling consequences. When I called the repairman to fix a leaky faucet, I expected a routine service call, not a descent into one of the most harrowing experiences of my life. He arrived on time, a man who seemed friendly, professional, and polite. His demeanor put me at ease, and I didn't think twice about letting him into my home. As he worked on the faucet and moved on to check a few other things around the house, I went about my day, not realizing that the atmosphere was slowly shifting from comfortable to unnerving. At first, it was subtle. His gaze lingered a little too long on my personal belongings, and his questions began to stray from the task at hand. He asked about my schedule, if I lived alone, how long I had been in the house. The questions were delivered casually. Something in his tone set off alarms in my mind. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that I was overreacting. After all, he was just a repairman doing his job. But as the day wore on, his behavior became increasingly unsettling. His friendly tone turned sharper, his comments more inappropriate. He started making suggestions that were far from professional, his gaze no longer curious but calculating. The realization hit me hard. I was alone in my home with a stranger whose intentions might not be as benign as they initially seemed. A cold wave of fear swept over me, making every interaction with him feel like a dangerous game. I knew I had to get him out of the house, but I couldn't afford to provoke him. My mind raced as I tried to come up with an excuse that would seem natural. I mentioned an upcoming appointment, hoping he would take the hint and wrap things up quickly. But instead of finishing his work, he became more insistent, suggesting that he stay a little longer to check on a few more things. His persistence only deepened my fear, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I scrambled for a solution. Desperation pushed me to take action. I decided to call a friend, pretending that they were on their way over to join me. As I spoke loudly on the phone, I watched his reaction closely. The mention of another person seemed to make him uneasy, his confident demeanor faltering for the first time. After a tense pause, he finally agreed to leave, gathering his tools with a quickness that betrayed his earlier reluctance. The moment he stepped out the door, a wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a lingering sense of dread. What if he came back? What if his intentions had been far darker than I had imagined? The psychological toll of the encounter was immediate and profound. My home, once a place of comfort and safety, now felt tainted by the memory of his presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that my space had been violated, that my sense of security had been irreparably damaged. In the days that followed, I became hyper-vigilant. I installed new locks on all the doors and added security cameras around the property. Every noise, every shadow seemed to hold a threat, and I found myself questioning the motives of anyone who came near my home. The fear had burrowed deep, turning what should have been ordinary interactions into moments of suspicion and anxiety. Yet, despite the fear, I also felt a newfound resolve. The experience had shaken me, but it had also made me more aware, more cautious. I learned to trust my instincts, to take action when something felt wrong. The encounter with the repairman had left a deep scar, one that would take time to heal, but it also instilled in me a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I came to accept that some fears never fully go away. They linger in the back of your mind, shaping the way you see the world. But I also realized that those fears don't have to define you. It can be a source of resilience, a reminder that you are capable of protecting yourself, even in the face of unexpected danger. It began as an ordinary day, until I stumbled upon something that shattered my sense of security. I had been rearranging the furniture in my living room when I noticed something unusual tucked away in the corner, hidden behind a decorative plant. It was a tiny camera, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. My heart skipped a beat as I picked it up, dread washing over me. Who had put it there? And more importantly, how long had they been watching me? I immediately felt exposed, vulnerable in my own home. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more chilling than the last. Had someone been spying on me all this time? The thought that every private moment, every mundane activity had been observed sent shivers down my spine. I quickly began searching the rest of the house, desperate to find out if there were more cameras hidden away. The idea that I had been unknowingly starring in someone's sick show was almost too much to bear. Sure enough, I found another camera in my bedroom, cleverly concealed among the books on my shelf. The realization that someone had been watching me in my most intimate moments was horrifying. Felt like a violation of the worst kind, and I could barely keep my hands from trembling as I collected the devices. The fear that whoever had planted these cameras might still be watching was overwhelming. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I needed to get out to find safety. I called the police, but even as I waited for them to arrive, paranoia grew. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, felt like a sign that the intruder was nearby, watching me. When the officers finally arrived, they confirmed what I had feared. Someone had been spying on me for weeks, maybe even longer. The cameras had been placed with precision, hidden in places I would never think to look. The thought that someone had been so close, so meticulous, was haunting. The police promised to investigate. The damage had already been done. Couldn't sleep that night, any night after that. Every shadow in my home seemed to hide something sinister. Every corner a potential hiding spot for another camera. The sense of safety I had once felt in my home was gone, replaced by a constant state of fear. Even after the police removed the cameras, the psychological impact remained. Couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. I eventually moved out, unable to live in a place that had become synonymous with terror. But even in my new home, the paranoia followed me. I found myself constantly checking for hidden devices, always on edge, never fully able to relax. The experience had left a deep scar, one that time couldn't easily heal. It was eerie how something so small, so easily overlooked, could cause such profound fear. The memory of those cameras, of being watched without my knowledge, still haunts me. I've learned to be more cautious, to never take my privacy for granted. But the fear never really goes away. It lingers in the back of my mind, a constant reminder that someone could be watching at any moment. The world no longer feels as safe as it once did, and I've had to come to terms with that. It's a chilling reality, one that has forever changed the way I view my surroundings. And though I try to move on, I know that the haunting memory of those hidden cameras will stay with me for a long time. So, here I am, sharing my story, not to scare you, but to remind you to stay vigilant. It's easy to think that something like this could never happen to you. But I've learned the hard way that life doesn't always follow the rules we set. Sometimes the unexpected barges in uninvited, and all we can do is be prepared. Because when the eerie quiet of the night is shattered by the sound of an intruder, it's not just your home that's invaded, it's your peace of mind too. It was supposed to be a straightforward arrangement, renting out a spare room to help cover the mortgage. My new tenant, Jake, seemed like a normal guy at first. Friendly, respectful, and quiet. But as days turned into weeks, small, unsettling things started to happen. Jake's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He'd linger in the kitchen at odd hours, and I'd often catch him staring at me with a look that sent chills down my spine. It was as if he was hiding something, and my uneasy feeling only grew stronger. One night, I came home late from work to find the house eerily quiet. Jake's door was ajar, and I could hear faint noises coming from inside. I knocked, calling out for him, but there was no response. I pushed the door open slightly, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Jake was pacing back and forth, mumbling to himself. The room was filled with notes and diagrams pinned to the walls, all centered around me. My routines, my habits, even details about my family. The sight was both chilling and disturbing. The realization that Jake had been obsessively tracking my every move left me feeling vulnerable and frightened. It was clear now that he had sinister plans. He'd made detailed notes about my schedule, my activities, and the people I interacted with. It was as if he was planning something, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in imminent danger. Confronting him seemed like a risk I couldn't afford, but ignoring the situation was equally dangerous. I decided to take action. I packed a small bag with essentials and left the house, staying with a friend while I figured out what to do next. The fear of what Jake might do if he discovered my absence was overwhelming. I called the police and explained the situation, but they were slow to act, insisting that there was no immediate threat. The bureaucratic red tape only added to my anxiety, making me feel even more helpless. As the days passed, I watched the house from a distance, my heart pounding every time I saw Jake leaving or arriving. It was a haunting experience, feeling so powerless while someone else lived in my home, under my nose with their own dark agenda. I began to fear that he might retaliate or become more dangerous if he found out I was watching him. The suspense was excruciating, and I felt as though I was living in a nightmare. Finally, the police conducted a raid on the house, but Jake had vanished. He left behind only the eerie remnants of his obsession, the notes, the diagrams, and the unsettling feeling that he might return. The authorities couldn't find him, and the case remained unsolved. The sense of violation was profound, and the psychological impact was deep. I had trusted someone who turned out to be a threat, and it was a lesson in how quickly things can spiral out of control. Even after moving to a new place, the memory of Jake's disturbing behavior lingered. I found myself constantly on edge, always wary of new roommates or tenants. The trust I once had was shattered, replaced by a sense of paranoia and fear. The experience left me scarred, a haunting reminder of how easily someone's true nature can be hidden behind a facade. My new home felt like a fortress, locked doors, security cameras, and a heightened awareness of my surroundings. I became obsessed with ensuring my safety, unable to shake the fear that someone might try to invade my life again. The experience had changed me fundamentally, leaving me with a deep-seated mistrust of people. It was a chilling reminder of how vulnerable we can be when we least expect it. The psychological scars took time to heal, and even now I occasionally find myself looking over my shoulder, questioning the intentions of those around me. The fear that Jake or someone like him might appear again is a haunting thought. The experience taught me to be more cautious, to never let my guard down, and to always be aware of the potential dangers that lurk in seemingly ordinary situations. It was a quiet evening when the knock came at the door. I was in the middle of preparing dinner when I heard the firm, authoritative rap. Looking through the peephole, I saw a man dressed in a police uniform. He held a badge and looked the part of a law enforcement officer. He explained that there had been reports of a break-in in the neighborhood, needed to check the premises for any signs of tampering. At first, everything seemed legitimate. I felt a chill, but I was reassured by the uniform and the badge. I opened the door, and he stepped inside, flashing his badge and starting a casual conversation. He asked me questions about my security system and whether I had noticed anything unusual. The whole situation felt a bit off, but I chalked it up to my nerves. As we walked through the house, he pointed out potential vulnerabilities, all while maintaining a polite and professional demeanor. It wasn't until I noticed that his questions were becoming increasingly invasive, asking about the layout of the house, the times I was typically home, that I started to feel uneasy. My apprehension grew when I saw that his badge seemed slightly different from what I remembered seeing on actual police officers. The creeping dread was palpable, but I didn't want to be rude or seem paranoid. I decided to be cautious and limited the information I shared, hoping it would be enough to satisfy him. When he requested access to the basement to check the security system, I hesitated. The basement was a space I rarely used, and I didn't see why it would be relevant to his inspection. As soon as we reached the basement, he started to act strangely, his behavior shifting from professional to oddly aggressive. He claimed he needed to inspect the wiring for possible tampering, and his demeanor became increasingly intimidating. The eerie realization that this man was not who he claimed to be hit me like a cold wave. My heart raced as I realized that I might be in grave danger. Summoning every ounce of courage, I made an excuse to leave the basement, saying I needed to get some documents from upstairs. I quickly called the real police, my hands shaking as I described the situation. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way, and I was instructed to remain calm and not to confront the imposter. The moments that followed were excruciatingly tense, as I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy while keeping an eye on the fake officer. The police arrived swiftly, and the fake officer was apprehended without incident. Turned out he was a con artist who had been using a stolen uniform to gain access to homes. The chilling thought that someone so dangerous had been inside my house, posing as a trusted authority figure, was overwhelming. The psychological impact of the experience lingered long after the immediate danger had passed. I took additional steps to secure my home and ensure that such a situation would never happen again. The incident left me wary and distrustful of strangers, especially those who claimed to be in positions of authority. The haunting realization that someone could manipulate trust to such an extent was a stark reminder of how important it is to stay vigilant. Even now, the memory of that night serves as a chilling reminder of how easily appearances can be deceiving. It was supposed to be a simple upgrade to my home security system, a way to add convenience and peace of mind. I had installed smart locks, automated lighting, and a state-of-the-art alarm system. Everything seemed to be working perfectly until one evening when my world was turned upside down. I returned home to find the house unusually quiet. As I approached the front door, I noticed it was ajar. Panic set in as I realized that my security system wasn't functioning. I tried to enter the house, but the door was locked tight despite the door handle moving freely. The system had somehow overridden the manual lock, trapping me outside. My heart raced as I ran to the back door, only to find it locked as well. The dread was overwhelming. I tried calling the customer support line for the security system. The phone line was dead. It was clear something was seriously wrong, and my fear quickly turned to terror. Inside, the lights flickered on and off erratically, and the alarm system blared intermittently, creating a cacophony of noise. It was as if the house was alive with malevolent energy. Through the windows, I could see the shadows of someone moving around, but I couldn't make out any details. The realization that someone had taken control of my entire security system was chilling. It was a high-tech nightmare, and I felt utterly powerless. Desperate, I tried to call the police again, but the line was still down. I had no choice but to find another way in. I managed to pry open a window, flipping into the house with trembling hands. The interior was a chaotic mess. Furniture was overturned, and personal items were scattered everywhere. It was clear that the intruder was deliberately creating confusion, and the atmosphere was thick with a haunting sense of violation. Navigating through the house, I saw the intruder at the control panel for the security system. They were hunched over, typing furiously. The sight was both eerie and infuriating. The feeling of being so close to the perpetrator, yet so helpless, was suffocating. I needed to act fast. I managed to sneak up behind them, and with a surge of adrenaline, I tackled them to the ground. The struggle was fierce, but I eventually subdued the intruder, using a rope I found in the garage to bind them. Police arrived shortly afterward, and the intruder was taken into custody. It turned out that they had hacked into my system remotely, using sophisticated software to control every aspect of my home. The chilling realization that someone could invade my privacy so completely and maliciously left me shaken. The psychological impact of knowing that my sanctuary had been turned into a playground for a hacker is profound. After the ordeal, I took extensive measures to secure my home, switching to a more secure system and enhancing my overall security protocols. The experience left me deeply cautious and aware of the vulnerabilities inherent in modern technology. The haunting memory of being trapped in my own home, under the control of a faceless intruder, was a chilling reminder of how exposed we can be. I'm still working through the anxiety of that experience, but I've learned to be more vigilant and protective of my personal space. I was thrilled when I found a roommate who seemed like a perfect match. Someone to share the rent, help with chores, and bring a bit of companionship. Liam was friendly, well-mannered, and kept to himself mostly. At first, everything seemed ideal. We bonded over small talk, and I felt a sense of relief knowing I wasn't alone in the house. However, the calm facade slowly started to crack, revealing something much darker lurking beneath. It began with odd occurrences. Small things out of place, strange noises at night, and a persistent sense of being watched. I tried to dismiss it as overactive imagination, but the unsettling feeling never truly went away. Then came the day I accidentally discovered Liam's secret. While looking for a missing item in his room, I stumbled upon a hidden compartment behind a loose panel in the wall. Inside, I found a stack of notebooks filled with detailed observations about me, my routines, my interactions, even my personal conversation. The revelation was horrifying. Liam had been obsessively documenting every aspect of my life, creating an eerie and elaborate profile of my daily existence. His notes were filled with unsettling details, like the times I left for work, people I met, and even my sleeping patterns. It was as if he was constructing a detailed map of my life, and the thought that he had been secretly watching and recording me made my skin crawl. I felt a chilling wave of fear as I realized just how deeply he had invaded my privacy. The more I read, the more the horror grew. I found sketches of the house's layout, with notes about where I spent most of my time. The sense of violation was overwhelming, and it became clear that Liam was planning something sinister. I knew I had to confront him, but the idea of facing someone so deeply obsessed with me was terrifying. I decided to take a cautious approach, trying to gather more evidence while plotting a safe escape. Then, as if by some twist of fate, we reached a more populated area. I spotted a police car parked on the side of the road. My heart pounded with a mix of hope and fear as I made a split-second decision. I managed to keep my voice steady as I spoke to the carjacker, suggesting that we stop to check the car's GPS for directions. With a mixture of suspicion and reluctant agreement, he allowed me to pull over near the police vehicle. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, my hands trembling as I signaled for help. The officers rushed over, and the man was apprehended without incident. The relief that washed over me was immense, but it was quickly followed by a wave of exhaustion. The terror of that encounter lingered, a haunting reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. The experience left me shaken and wary. My sense of safety was deeply compromised, and I found it difficult to drive alone at night without feeling a creeping fear. The incident had a chilling impact on my psyche, leaving me with a constant reminder of the dangers that lurk in the most unexpected places. It was a harsh lesson in vulnerability, one that I hoped never to experience again. It was an ordinary Tuesday when the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of a package. I had been expecting a delivery, so I was relieved to see the familiar courier at my doorstep. He handed me a large, unmarked box and left, not waiting for a signature or confirmation. As I closed the door and set the box down, I noticed something odd. It was unusually heavy, far heavier than what I was expecting. My curiosity piqued. I decided to open it right away. The moment I lifted the lid, a wave of dread washed over me. Inside was a collection of unsettling items. A series of photographs of myself taken from various angles around my home, along with a disturbing note that simply read, "I've been watching." My heart raced as I took in the eerie detail. The photos were recent, some even showing me in moments of solitude. The sense of violation was profound, and the realization that someone had been monitoring me was both chilling and horrifying. I immediately tried to contact the delivery service, but my calls went unanswered. The unnerving silence was broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall, amplifying the growing sense of unease. The note felt like a sinister message, a taunt from someone who had been watching my every move. I began to fear that the delivery was not just a prank, but a prelude to something more menacing. The situation was quickly spiraling out of control, and I needed to act fast. Called the police, trying to explain the situation with a voice that trembled despite my efforts to stay calm. They assured me they would send an officer over, but the wait felt interminable. The anticipation of what might happen next was haunting, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was lurking nearby, watching my every reaction. Every creak of the house, every shadow outside, seemed to amplify my fears. When the police finally arrived, they took the box and photographs for evidence. They conducted a thorough search of the area, found no immediate signs of intrusion or surveillance. The lack of concrete evidence was frustrating and left me feeling even more vulnerable. The officers assured me they would investigate, but the psychological impact of the situation was already taking its toll. The days that followed were a blur of paranoia and fear. I found myself constantly checking the locks, peering out the windows, and jumping at every sound. The sense of safety I once took for granted had been irrevocably shattered. The haunting memory of that package, the realization that someone had been observing me, lingered in the back of my mind. It was a chilling reminder of how easily our privacy can be violated, and the fear of the unknown became a constant companion. Even now, the shadow of that day hangs over me, a constant reminder of how vulnerable we can be. The package was never fully explained, and the feeling of being watched, of having my privacy so egregiously invaded, has left an indelible mark. I try to move on, but the haunting memory of those photographs and that note still sends shivers down my spine whenever I hear the doorbell ring. I was looking forward to the repairman's visit, thinking it would be a straightforward job to fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen and some creaky hinges on the doors. The handyman, Tom, arrived on time, his tool belt brimming with various gadgets and tools. He greeted me with a friendly smile and assured me that he'd have everything sorted out quickly. As he worked, I tried to focus on my daily tasks, but something about his presence felt oddly unsettling. At first, it was just a nagging feeling, like the subtle sensation of being watched. I brushed it off, attributing it to my overactive imagination. However, as the day wore on, I noticed Tom's behavior becoming increasingly peculiar. He seemed to linger in certain rooms longer than necessary, and his movements were oddly deliberate. Every now and then, he would glance over his shoulder, as if making sure I wasn't paying too much attention to him. The atmosphere in the house grew tense, with a chilling edge that I couldn't ignore. Tom's casual demeanor began to feel more like a facade. When he asked to use the bathroom, I felt a pang of unease. I found myself wondering what he might be doing behind closed doors. My thoughts raced, and I felt a growing sense of dread. The more I observed him, the more the sense of unease deepened. It was as though he was hiding something sinister. As he continued working, I decided to check on him more frequently, hoping to find something that might explain the odd feeling. When I entered the kitchen, I found him fiddling with the faucet in a way that seemed unusually meticulous. He was muttering to himself, and his focus was so intense that he didn't notice me standing there. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The atmosphere was suffused with an eerie tension. My fears were confirmed when I noticed a small, hidden camera embedded in the corner of the kitchen, just above the sink. It was almost as if it had been installed with the intention of watching me. The sight was horrifying, and the realization that Tom had been secretly surveilling me was beyond chilling. I felt a surge of panic and anger. I had to get him out of the house immediately. I managed to stay calm and told Tom that I needed to step out for a while. I watched him leave, my heart pounding, as I quickly called the police. The officers arrived and conducted a thorough search, finding additional hidden cameras in various rooms. The horror of knowing that someone had been secretly watching me in my own home was overwhelming. Tom was apprehended, but the psychological impact of his intrusion lingered. The incident left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. Even after the police had taken Tom away and removed the cameras, the fear remained. My sense of security had been shattered, replaced by a constant feeling of unease. It was haunting to think that someone had been so close, so meticulous in their invasion of my personal space. The experience left me with deep emotional scars and a heightened sense of caution. The house had always been a sanctuary, but lately strange things had been happening. It started with odd noises coming from behind a locked door in the attic, a door I had always kept closed. At first, I dismissed the sounds as the creaks and groans of an old house settling. However, as the noises persisted and grew more frequent, my unease transformed into fear. The sounds were too rhythmic and deliberate to be mere happenstance. One evening, as the sun set and the shadows lengthened, I decided to investigate. The eerie feeling that had been gnawing at me grew stronger, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of grim determination, I approached the locked door. The key to the lock was tucked away in a drawer, and as I fumbled with it, My hands shook with anxiety. When the lock finally clicked open, I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door ajar. The hinges groaned in protest, and the sight that greeted me was both horrifying and surreal. The room beyond was a makeshift living space, bedrolls, food wrappers, and personal belongings scattered haphazardly. It was clear that someone had been living there, and the realization struck me like a bolt of icy fear. The room was disturbingly clean in some areas, as if someone had taken great care to make it livable, but it was the human presence that made the situation truly terrifying. The most chilling part was the crude drawings on the walls, depicting scenes of me in various states of distress. It was as if the intruder had been documenting my life, keeping track of my every move. I heard a faint sound behind me, a rustle, a shift in the air. My heart pounded as I turned, only to find that I wasn't alone. There, crouched in the shadows, was a figure watching me with cold, unblinking eyes. The intruder's presence was almost spectral, their silence more unnerving than any words could have been. The fear was so intense that it felt like the room was closing in on me. Without thinking, I backed out of the room, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it quickly and called the police, my voice trembling as I described the situation. The officers arrived promptly, and after a thorough search, apprehended the intruder hiding in the attic. The relief of their capture was immense, but the haunting knowledge that someone had been living so close for so long lingered, casting a long shadow over the safety of my home. I had invested a small fortune in the latest high-tech home security system, believing it would offer a fortress-like protection. Cameras, motion detectors, and alarms were installed throughout the house, all linked to my smartphone. It was supposed to be a state-of-the-art defense against any potential threats. Yet one night, the sense of security it provided was shattered in the most horrifying way. It started with a seemingly normal evening. I was relaxing on the couch, watching TV, when I noticed something odd on my security feed. The camera views were flickering, and the live footage was cutting in and out. Initially, I thought it might be a glitch, but the problem persisted. I decided to check the system settings, only to find that they were being accessed remotely. My heart sank as I realized someone had gained unauthorized control over my security system. The tension was palpable as I attempted to troubleshoot the issue. The security app on my phone showed that the system was offline and the smart locks on the doors were malfunctioning. I tried resetting everything, but it was as if the intruder was one step ahead of me, manipulating the system with disturbing ease. The haunting thought that someone was inside my house, controlling my security, sent shivers down my spine. I felt a growing sense of dread as the intruder used the system to unlock doors and disable alarms. The house seemed to be closing in on me, each creak and groan amplified by the eerie knowledge that someone else was in control. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps, and the shadows moving across the walls became more menacing. It was as though the intruder was toying with me, using the security breach to escalate my fear. Desperation set in as I realized that I was trapped in my own home. My attempts to secure it rendered useless. I managed to call the police, but with the security system compromised, I had no way to accurately convey the gravity of the situation. The minutes felt like hours as I waited for the authorities to arrive. The fear of what might happen next was overwhelming. When the police finally arrived, they found the intruder in the act of tampering with the security system's central hub. They were quickly apprehended. The damage was done. The intrusion had left a lasting psychological scar. The haunting memory of being so utterly vulnerable in what was supposed to be a secure environment lingered, casting a long shadow over my sense of safety. It was a typical evening, and I was preparing to relax after a long day. The doorbell rang, and through the peephole, I saw a man dressed in a police uniform. He had a stern look and carried a clipboard, which seemed odd but not entirely unusual. I opened the door slightly, thinking he might be conducting a neighborhood safety check or something similar. The man introduced himself as Officer Stevens and explained he was performing a routine inspection related to recent burglaries in the area. His manner was professional, and he had all the right credentials: badges, identification, and even a police vehicle parked outside. Despite feeling a slight twinge of skepticism, I allowed him inside. After all, it seemed reasonable to cooperate with law enforcement, especially given the recent spike in crime. As he began to ask questions and inspect the house, I noticed something off. The questions seemed intrusive, delving into personal details that felt unnecessary. The man was also taking notes with a peculiar intensity, which made me uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, but I was unsure how to voice my concerns without seeming paranoid. The atmosphere grew more unsettling as he continued his inspection. The man's behavior became increasingly odd. He was pacing around, peering into every corner, and making cryptic comments about keeping the house secure. My discomfort turned into dread when he started asking questions about my daily routines and security measures in specific detail. His questions felt more like an interrogation than a routine check. The situation took a chilling turn when I noticed the man's eyes scanning the house as if evaluating it for potential weaknesses. His manner was no longer polite or professional, but rather cold and calculating. The fear that had been gnawing at me erupted into a full-blown panic. I decided to excuse myself to call a friend, hoping to buy some time and verify the legitimacy of the officer. As soon as I stepped away, the man's demeanor shifted completely. He began to fumble with the security system and moved towards the back rooms. It was clear now that he was not a police officer, but an imposter with sinister intention. My heart pounded as I hurried to call the real police, providing them with a detailed description and my location. When the authorities arrived, they quickly apprehended the impersonator, who was found to have stolen police equipment and was masquerading as an officer to gain access to homes. The relief of their capture was immense, but the haunting realization that someone had invaded my home under the guise of authority left me feeling violated and fearful. The trust I had in my own safety was shattered, and the memory of that eerie encounter lingered long after the incident was resolved. It was a routine evening for Ava, popular vlogger known for her engaging live streams. Her audience was used to her energetic and upbeat content, but tonight she decided to do something a bit different. A behind-the-scenes look at her home life. The stream began with Ava giving her viewers a tour of her cozy living room, chatting about her day, and sharing some upcoming plans. The interaction with her fans was lively and fun, with comments and questions flooding in. Everything was going smoothly until, out of nowhere, a comment popped up that made Ava's blood run cold. It was from a viewer who had been making unsettling remarks all night. "Nice house you've got there," comment read, followed by, "Hope you're ready for a surprise." Ava dismissed it as an overzealous fan playing a prank, but a creeping sense of unease began to settle over her. Just as she was about to dismiss the comment, she heard a knock on the door. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the timing was too coincidental. She glanced at her live stream feed, only to see a figure standing outside her door. Someone she didn't recognize. The figure was holding a phone, watching her live stream as she spoke. The fear was immediate and palpable. Ava's attempts to keep calm were overshadowed by the growing sense of dread. She decided to check the door, hoping to confront whoever was there and perhaps find a rational explanation. As she opened it slightly, she was met with a horrifying sight. A masked person staring back at her with an unsettling grin. Without a word, the figure forced their way inside, and the live stream viewers watched in real time as Ava's face contorted with terror. She quickly slammed the door and locked it, but the intruder was relentless. The chase through her house was both chilling and surreal. Her viewers, initially thinking it was part of the show, soon realized the gravity of the situation as Ava's panicked breaths and hurried footsteps were broadcasted live. Ava raced through the house, trying to stay ahead of the intruder while simultaneously attempting to call the police. The chase was chaotic, with the intruder's heavy footsteps echoing ominously behind her. The live stream chat exploded with viewers trying to offer advice, sending messages of support, and expressing their horror. Ava's fear was palpable, and the haunting reality of the situation was becoming increasingly clear. In a desperate move, Ava managed to lock herself in a room and finally contacted the authorities. The police arrived quickly, breaking into the house and apprehending the intruder. The sense of relief was immense, but the psychological scars from the ordeal were profound. The haunting memory of having her personal nightmare played out live for the world to see left Ava grappling with a sense of vulnerability and fear that lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. It was a quiet afternoon when the doorbell rang. I was in the middle of preparing dinner, the aroma of spices filling the kitchen, when the unexpected visitor arrived. Through the peephole, I saw a man dressed in casual clothing, carrying a duffel bag. He looked disheveled and appeared to be in some kind of distress. The sight of him alone tugged at my sense of empathy, so I hesitated before opening the door. "Sorry to bother you," the man said as I cracked the door open. "I'm really lost and could use some help. My car broke down a few miles away and my phone's dead. Could I use your phone to call for a tow truck?" The plea sounded genuine enough, and although something felt slightly off, I let him in. It was a gesture of kindness I might have regretted, but at that moment, I was more concerned about helping someone in need. The man stepped inside, his demeanor appearing calm and grateful. He immediately began scanning the room, his eyes flicking around with an unsettling intensity. As I handed him my phone, he took it with a shaky hand but didn't make any move to dial. Instead, he turned to face me, his expression shifting from one of gratitude to something darker. "Actually," he said, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper, "I need more than just a phone call." A cold dread seeped through me as the man's facade crumbled. He reached into his bag, pulling out a menacing weapon, and his earlier pleas turned into a grim revelation of his true intention. The sudden shift from benign to malevolent was both disorienting and terrifying. The feeling of betrayal was immediate and profound. The atmosphere in the house became suffocating. I could hear the pounding of my own heart as the man began to issue demands. The urgency of the situation was overwhelming, and every move I made seemed to escalate the danger. The intruder's threats and the eerie calmness with which he spoke only added to the haunting tension of the moment. I needed to find a way out, to escape from this nightmare. Using the pretense of going to another room, I discreetly reached for my phone and dialed 911. My hands trembled as I spoke in a low, panicked voice, trying to convey the urgency of the situation without alerting the intruder. The sound of sirens in the distance was a bittersweet relief. When the police arrived, they found the man still inside, his menacing demeanor now reduced to one of desperation and fear. The sense of relief at his capture was immense. The psychological impact of the encounter lingered. The chilling realization that someone could so easily disguise their true nature and intentions haunted me long after the incident was over. It started as an innocent attempt to streamline my digital life. I had heard about a new app that promised to enhance productivity by integrating all my scheduling, social media, and location tracking into one convenient platform. Curious and eager to simplify my chaotic schedule, I downloaded the app without giving it much thought. The installation was quick, and the app's interface seemed user-friendly. I was impressed by how seamlessly it synced with my various accounts and offered real-time updates on my activity. It felt like a game-changer, and I began to rely on it heavily, not realizing the eerie price of convenience I was about to pay. Days passed, and I continued using the app, unaware of the sinister truth lurking behind its seemingly harmless features. My daily routine was meticulously tracked, from my work hours to my gym visits, and even my social gatherings. The app's notifications became a constant presence, reminding me of appointments and offering suggestions based on my location. It was only when I started receiving strange messages from unknown numbers, messages that detailed my whereabouts with unnerving accuracy, that I began to feel a creeping sense of dread. The messages were initially innocuous, such as, "Hope you're enjoying the park," or "Looking forward to seeing you at the cafe." At first, I brushed them off as random coincidences, or perhaps a glitch in the app. However, the tone of the messages grew increasingly personal and unsettling. They began to include specific details about my private life, such as mentioning names of friends and commenting on intimate moments. The sense of invasion was horrifying. I realized that the app wasn't just tracking my activities. It was being used to monitor my every move. The situation escalated when I received a chilling message stating, "I'm outside your door." My heart raced as I peered through the window and saw nothing but the darkness of the street. Fear that someone was lurking nearby, using the app to pinpoint my location, was almost paralyzing. I felt exposed and vulnerable. The feeling of safety I had once enjoyed now shattered. Desperate for answers and terrified for my safety, I contacted the app's customer support, only to find that they were unhelpful and dismissive. The app's permissions had allowed for a deep level of access that I had unknowingly granted. It was clear that the stalking was being facilitated through this seemingly innocuous tool. In a panic, I called the police, providing them with the details of the app and the disturbing messages I had received. The authorities acted quickly, tracing the messages and the app's data back to a single individual who had been using the information to stalk me. The apprehension of the stalker brought a sense of relief, but the haunting realization of how easily my privacy had been breached lingered. The app that was meant to simplify my life had become a tool for terror, leaving me with a profound sense of vulnerability and mistrust. The night shift had been grueling, the hours dragging on and the exhaustion piling up. I was relieved to finally clock out and head home, eager to crawl into bed and escape the grueling day behind me. The streets were quiet as I drove, the moonlight casting an eerie glow on the empty roads. I was looking forward to the solace of my apartment, where I could unwind and leave the stress of work behind. When I arrived, the building was shrouded in darkness. My apartment was on the top floor, and as I climbed the stairs, the silence was almost deafening. The usual hum of the building's lights was absent, making the hallway feel unnaturally cold and unsettling. I brushed off the shiver running down my spine, attributing it to fatigue and the odd hour of my return. As I fumbled with my keys at the door, a sudden thought crossed my mind. The door felt strangely ajar, though I was certain I had locked it before leaving. My heartbeat quickened, and I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. The interior of my apartment was shrouded in darkness, and the familiar safety of my home was now tinged with an ominous sense of dread. I stepped inside, calling out, "Hello," but the only response was the echo of my own voice bouncing off the walls. The stillness was unsettling, each creak of the floorboards amplifying the tension in the air. As I made my way to the light switch, my nerves were on edge. I flicked it on, but the lights didn't come on. The darkness seemed to press in from every corner, heightening my anxiety. I reached for my phone, using its flashlight to navigate through the apartment. The beam of light cut through the gloom, revealing nothing out of place, at least, first glance. My pulse quickened when I reached the living room. That's when I noticed something chilling. The furniture had been rearranged subtly, and the cushions on the sofa were oddly disheveled. I scanned the room, trying to shake off the creeping feeling of being watched. Then I saw it, a shadowy figure in the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light. The figure was still, almost blending into the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I squinted, trying to make out the person's features. The horror of the situation hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a stranger, their eyes glinting in the sparse light, watching me with an unsettling calmness. The intruder's presence was both haunting and infuriating. They didn't move, just stared with a cold, calculating gaze. My mind raced as I considered my option. I wanted to run, to escape the apartment and call for help, but the fear of the unknown held me rooted in place. I backed away slowly, trying to keep my movements as quiet as possible. I managed to reach my phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. All felt like it took forever, every second stretching into an eternity as I described the situation to the operator. I could hear the intruder moving behind me, their footsteps soft but menacing. The police arrived quickly, their flashlights slicing through the darkness as they swept through the apartment. They apprehended the intruder, who turned out to be a stranger who had somehow managed to gain access to my building. The relief was immense, but the haunting knowledge that someone had been waiting in the dark, ready to turn my sanctuary into a nightmare, left an indelible mark on my sense of security. The apartment, once a place of peace, now held an eerie reminder of how quickly safety could be upended. It had been one of those days where everything felt out of control. I was looking forward to nothing more than a long, relaxing bath to wash away the stress. The warm water, fragrant bubbles, and the quiet solitude of the bathroom were my sanctuary. I sank into the tub, letting out a sigh of relief as the warmth enveloped me. The bathroom door was securely locked, or so I thought, and the soft, calming music from my phone completed the illusion of safety. As I closed my eyes, trying to drift into a state of relaxation, the tranquility was abruptly shattered by a sound, faint but unmistakable creak outside the door. My heart skipped a beat, and I immediately froze, straining to hear any further noises. The house had been quiet all day, and the sudden sound was jarring. I told myself it was just my imagination, or perhaps a house settling. The feeling of unease was hard to shake. The footsteps grew clearer, more deliberate, and closer. My breathing became shallow as I listened to the sound of someone moving around outside the bathroom. The realization hit me with chilling clarity. Someone had broken in. The idea that my sanctuary had been breached was terrifying. I was trapped, vulnerable, and entirely exposed. I reached for my phone, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The water was still running, creating a soothing backdrop that contrasted sharply with the panic building inside me. I sent a quick, frantic text to a friend, hoping they'd understand the urgency and call the police. The message was brief, barely coherent. "Someone's in the house, please help." Every second felt like an eternity as I listened to the intruder moving around the house. The footsteps were now accompanied by the occasional thump or scrape, each sound amplifying my fear. My mind raced through scenarios of how to escape. The bathroom was my only refuge. The lock on the door seemed like a flimsy barrier against whatever intentions the intruder had. I could hear the intruder getting closer to the bathroom door, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they were savoring the moment. My fear turned into a cold, creeping dread as I imagined them standing outside, perhaps trying to figure out how to force their way in. My entire body was tense, my mind struggling to stay calm amidst the growing terror. Suddenly, the bathroom door handle jiggled. My heart raced, and I clutched the edge of the tub, bracing myself for the worst. I held my breath, every sound magnified in the oppressive silence that followed. The handle stopped moving, and the footsteps faded away, leaving a haunting quiet in their wake. Minutes later, I heard the distant wail of police sirens, their arrival a bittersweet relief. The intruder was gone by the time they arrived, but the damage was done. The bath, which had promised peace and relaxation, had instead become the setting for a horrifying invasion of privacy. The sense of violation was overwhelming, and the once cozy bathroom now felt like a grim reminder of how quickly safety can dissolve into fear. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other, or at least knew of each other. I had lived in my house for years, comfortable in the familiarity of my surrounding. The neighbors were friendly, though none were particularly close friends. It wasn't until recently that I began to notice something off about the family next door. The Johnsons had always been a bit of an enigma. They kept to themselves and rarely participated in neighborhood gatherings, but recently, their behavior had become increasingly peculiar. I noticed that their garage was often open late at night, and strange noises would sometimes drift over the fence. The sounds were unsettling, scraping and muffled thumps that seemed out of place in the otherwise serene neighborhood. One evening, as I was watering my garden, I saw Mr. Johnson standing by the garage, hastily closing it and glancing around as if making sure no one had seen him. His actions seemed furtive, and his behavior was anything but casual. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate further. What I hoped to uncover was simply an eccentric hobby or perhaps a project gone awry, but what I found was far more chilling. Under the guise of needing to borrow a tool, I knocked on the Johnsons' door. Mrs. Johnson answered, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She was polite, but visibly tense. I managed to get a brief glimpse into the house as she opened the door, a glimpse that sent a shiver down my spine. The interior was unusually dark, and I could swear I saw strange, ominous shapes moving in the shadows. I didn't linger long, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. That night, as I lay in bed, my thoughts kept returning to the Johnsons and their odd behavior. My unease grew into a gnawing anxiety. I decided to keep a closer watch, documenting what I could see from my window. The next few nights, I observed more unsettling patterns. The garage door would open and close at odd hours, and I noticed that Mr. Johnson was frequently carrying large, heavy bags that he would later throw away in different trash bins around town. The whole situation had a haunting, secretive air about it. Unable to ignore my growing suspicions, I contacted the local authorities and shared my observations. They agreed to investigate, but assured me they would handle it discreetly. The real horror began when the police came to my door, explaining that the Johnsons had been involved in a horrifying criminal enterprise. They were linked to a series of disturbing incidents, and the strange noises I had heard were evidence of their illicit activities. The authorities discovered a hidden room in their garage where they had been keeping disturbing items related to their criminal activities. The discovery was shocking and left me reeling. The thought that such darkness had been lurking next door was profoundly unsettling. My once safe and familiar neighborhood had been tainted by a horrifying truth, and the sense of security I had taken for granted was forever altered. It was supposed to be a fun evening, a chance to unwind and enjoy the company of friends. I had planned a small gathering at my house, and everything seemed perfect. The music was upbeat, food was plentiful, and the energy was high as guests mingled and enjoyed themselves. Laughter and conversation filled the air, creating a lively and carefree atmosphere. As the night progressed, I began to notice something strange. Among the familiar faces of my friends, there was an unfamiliar one, a person I hadn't invited. They were standing in the corner, blending in with the crowd, but clearly out of place. First, I assumed they were a plus one of my guests, but their presence was unsettling. They seemed to be watching everyone with a disturbing intensity. I tried to ignore the growing unease and focused on enjoying the party. But as the night wore on, the unfamiliar guests' behavior became more concerning. They were moving around the room, interacting with guests in a way that seemed off. Too familiar, too probing. I decided it was time to confront them and find out who they were. I approached the stranger with a friendly smile, trying to mask my apprehension. "Hi there. I don't think we've met. Are you a friend of someone here?" I asked, attempting to sound casual. The guest's response was polite but evasive. They offered a vague explanation about being a friend of a friend, but their eyes darted around nervously. Something about their demeanor struck me as odd, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I pressed further, asking for more details about who they knew and how they had come to be at my party. The stranger's demeanor shifted abruptly. Their polite facade cracked, revealing a cold, calculating look. The change was jarring, and my heart began to race as I realized that this was no ordinary party crasher. The stranger's hand slipped into their pocket, and I could see the glint of something metallic, a weapon. Panic surged through me as I realized the situation had taken a dangerous turn. I tried to keep my voice steady as I told them that I needed them to leave immediately. The party guests, sensing the tension, began to murmur and glance in our direction. The stranger's response was chillingly calm. "You should have minded your own business," they said, their voice low and menacing. They began to advance toward me, the weapon now clearly visible. My instinct was to get to safety, but there was no clear escape route amidst the crowd of confused and frightened guests. I quickly signaled for my friends to move away and called the police, trying to stay composed despite the fear gripping me. The confrontation escalated rapidly, with the stranger's threats growing more intense. My mind raced as I tried to figure out how to defuse the situation, or at least buy time until help arrived. The arrival of the police was a relief. Though the scene was chaotic, the stranger was apprehended, and the guests were left in a state of shock. The evening, which had started with such promise, ended in a haunting reminder of how quickly things can turn from celebration to terror. The party, once a symbol of joy and community, had become a chilling reminder of the dangers that can lurk in even the most ordinary situation. After a relaxing vacation, I was eager to return home and settle back into my routine. The trip had been a much-needed escape from the daily grind, filled with beautiful scenery and joyful moments. As I pulled up to my house, the familiar sight of my front porch and garden brought a sense of comfort. Little did I know, that comfort was about to be shattered in the most unsettling way. When I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, something immediately felt off. The air was stale and the house was unnaturally quiet. I called out, "Hello?" But the only response was the echo of my own voice. At first, I chalked it up to the house being empty and slightly disheveled from my absence. But as I moved through the rooms, it became clear that something was wrong. In the living room, I noticed the furniture was rearranged. My once orderly space was now cluttered with personal items that didn't belong to me. A chilling thought crossed my mind. Someone had been in my house. My pulse quickened as I moved cautiously through each room, my sense of unease growing with every step. When I reached the bedroom, the reality of the situation hit me hard. There, in the center of the room, was an unfamiliar figure lying on my bed. The intruder appeared to be lounging comfortably, as if they had been living there for weeks. My heart pounded as I realized the magnitude of the violation. Someone had been living in my home, using my belongings, and now they were confronting me in my own space. I tried to keep my composure as I addressed the intruder. "Who are you? And what are you doing in my house?" I demanded, my voice trembling slightly. The stranger looked up, feigning surprise, and then a smirk spread across their face. "I didn't think anyone would be back so soon," they said, their tone dripping with casual menace. "I was just getting comfortable." The audacity of the intruder was both infuriating and terrifying. They showed no signs of wanting to leave peacefully, and their nonchalant attitude only added to the eerie atmosphere. I could see that they had made themselves quite at home. My kitchen was stocked with groceries they had bought, and there were personal items scattered around. I knew I had to act quickly. I reached for my phone and dialed 911, trying to maintain a calm voice as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. The intruder watched me with an unsettling calm, their eyes following my every move. They seemed unconcerned by the impending arrival of the police, their demeanor suggesting they were prepared for confrontation. As I waited for the authorities to arrive, I tried to keep a safe distance from the intruder, who continued to taunt me with their brazen attitude. The situation felt like a nightmarish invasion of privacy, a horrifying reminder that even the sanctuary of one's home can be breached by someone with malevolent intention. When the police finally arrived, the intruder put up a brief struggle before being apprehended. The relief of seeing them in handcuffs was palpable, but the psychological impact of the invasion lingered long after. My home, once a place of comfort, had been turned into a battleground, and the unsettling experience left an indelible mark on my sense of safety and security. It started out innocuously enough. My house key was simply missing. I shrugged it off as a minor inconvenience, assuming I had misplaced it somewhere in the chaos of everyday life. But as days passed, I began to notice strange signs that someone had been inside my home. Items were out of place, drawers were slightly open, and the eerie feeling of being watched started to creep over me. The first sign of trouble came when I found my living room window slightly ajar, even though I was certain I had closed it before leaving. I figured it was just a fluke, perhaps a gust of wind or a lapse in memory. But then the odd occurrences continued. Food in the pantry was disturbed, and a small collection of my personal belongings had been shifted around. Each time, I tried to convince myself that it was nothing more than my imagination running wild. The unsettling realization that someone had been entering my home set in when I found a strange set of muddy footprints leading from the hallway to my bedroom. Tracks were unmistakable, and unmistakably out of place. It dawned on me that my missing key had likely been stolen, and the intruder had used it to access my house while I was away. I decided to set up a few security cameras around the house to catch any further disturbances. The footage revealed an unnerving pattern. Someone had been coming and going at odd hours, their face hidden beneath a hood or mask. The evidence was haunting. I watched in dread as the intruder rummaged through my belongings, their intentions unclear, but their presence undeniably invasive. One evening, as I reviewed the footage, I noticed a figure entering my house with a familiar air of confidence. My stomach churned as I realized this was happening again. I had no choice but to confront the intruder. I locked up all the potential escape routes and braced myself for what lay ahead. Confrontation was every bit as terrifying as I had imagined. The intruder had returned for another round of unsettling invasion, When they realized I was home, they seemed taken aback, but their demeanor quickly turned hostile. "You shouldn't have come back," they snarled, their voice laced with malice. I was caught between fear and resolve. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I managed to stay calm and dialed 911, while trying to avoid provoking the intruder further. The standoff felt like an eternity, the silence punctuated only by the occasional harsh breath or shuffle of feet. The police arrived swiftly, and the intruder was apprehended, but the haunting knowledge that someone had so thoroughly violated my space lingered long after. The feeling of safety in my home had been shattered, and despite the resolution of the situation, the fear of the unknown and the realization of how easily someone could invade my personal space left a lasting mark. T was never found, but the security measures I implemented thereafter brought a semblance of peace, though the unsettling memories would always remain. The day started off like any other. I had spent a quiet afternoon at home, relaxing and catching up on some much-needed rest. The living room was my favorite spot, with its plush sofa and soft lighting providing a comforting backdrop for my downtime. Little did I know that very sofa would soon become the epicenter of a terrifying ordeal. That evening, as I settled in to watch a movie, I noticed an odd sound. Faint rustling coming from within the cushions. I dismissed it as a figment of my imagination, or perhaps just the sofa's springs settling. But as the sound grew more pronounced, my unease began to mount. I paused the movie and tried to ignore the creeping sense of dread. The rustling persisted. I finally decided to investigate, thinking maybe a loose coin or something had fallen into the depths of the sofa. I began to lift the cushions and pull apart the fabric, but what I found made my blood run cold. The deeper I dug, the more I felt like I was uncovering a hidden secret, something that didn't belong in the cozy confines of my home. As I peeled back the last layer of fabric, I discovered a small, hidden compartment. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a pair of eyes staring back at me from the darkness. The sight was absolutely chilling. Someone had been hiding inside the sofa, concealed by the very cushions that had seemed so innocent and inviting. The intruder's eyes were wide with fear and something darker, determination. They tried to scramble out, but I was too stunned to react immediately. It took me a moment to process what was happening before I rushed to the phone and dialed 911. My hands shaking uncontrollably. The intruder clambered out of their hiding place, their movements frantic. The sight of them emerging from the sofa like a scene from a horror movie was both surreal and terrifying. They seemed disoriented, but quickly regained their composure, advancing toward me with a menacing intent. My heart raced as I tried to keep the intruder at bay, barricading myself in another room until the police arrived. Each second felt like an eternity, and every creak of the floorboards outside made me flinch. The eerie atmosphere was punctuated by the occasional thump or scratch from the intruder as they tried to get through. When the police finally arrived, they apprehended the intruder, who turned out to be someone with a history of such unsettling behavior. The experience left an indelible mark on me, as I could never look at my once comfortable sofa the same way again. The idea that someone had been hiding within its depths, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, was a haunting realization that lingered long after the ordeal was over. Quiet of the house was suddenly shattered by an unfamiliar noise coming from downstairs. I had been enjoying a peaceful evening alone, reading a book in the comfort of my living room. A sudden, jarring sound, a crash followed by footsteps, sent a wave of panic through me. My heart pounded as I realized that someone might be in the house, and the serene calm of the evening was replaced by a chilling sense of dread. I grabbed my phone, hands trembling, and dialed 911. My voice was shaky as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. "I heard a noise downstairs, and I think someone might be breaking in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. The dispatcher's response was immediate but unsettling. "Stay calm. I need you to listen carefully. The intruder is already inside the house. Lock yourself in a room and stay on the line with me. Help is on the way." The realization that the intruder was already inside my home was horrifying. I had hoped it was just a false alarm, but the dispatcher's words turned my fear into a cold, gripping terror. I quickly moved to lock the bedroom door, trying to ignore the eerie sounds of footsteps growing louder and closer. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of the situation, each creak of the floorboards and distant thump heightening my anxiety. As I huddled in the corner of the room, the dispatcher's calm voice provided a sliver of comfort amidst the chaos. They guided me through staying quiet and keeping my phone on to monitor any sounds. "Stay as quiet as possible. Can you hear anything else?" the dispatcher asked, their voice a steady anchor in the storm of my fear. I listened intently, my senses on high alert. The footsteps had stopped for a moment, replaced by the unsettling silence of the house. Then I heard a muffled sound, a low, guttural noise that sent shivers down my spine. The intruder was moving around, searching for me or something they wanted. The dispatcher's instructions were clear but difficult to follow. "Keep your phone on. We're sending officers to your location. If you hear the intruder approaching your room, try to stay hidden and don't make any noise." Each second felt like an eternity, as I waited for the sound of sirens or the reassuring presence of the police. The silence grew heavy, punctuated only by the occasional scuffle or creak from the intruder. My fear was palpable, the haunting knowledge that someone was so close, lurking in the dark corners of my home. Eventually, the sound of sirens pierced the silence, bringing a wave of relief. The police arrived swiftly and conducted a thorough search of the house. They apprehended the intruder, who had been hiding in the attic, waiting for the right moment to strike. The experience left me shaken but profoundly grateful for the dispatcher's guidance and the swift response of the authority. It was a typical Saturday afternoon when I noticed the package lying on my front porch. It had been misdelivered, marked with the address of my neighbor 2 doors down. I considered taking it over to them right away, but decided to open it first to ensure it was indeed meant for them. I figured it might contain something valuable or sensitive, and if so, would be better to handle it carefully. As I tore open the box, an uneasy feeling settled over me. Inside, rather than finding a simple parcel of everyday items, I discovered a collection of disturbing content. Among the jumbled contents was a series of photographs, grainy, unsettling images of my own house and its interior, along with a handwritten note that read, "I see you." My blood ran cold. The photos were taken from various angles, showing both the inside and outside of my home. Each one seemed to document a different aspect of my daily life, capturing moments that felt deeply invasive. The note, with its chilling message, made my heart race with fear. Before I could process the full impact of what I had found, a knock echoed through my front door. Startled, I hesitated, unsure of whether to answer. When I finally did, I was met with the sight of my neighbor, a look of agitation on their face. They demanded the package back, their tone urgent and uncompromising. "Why do you have my package?" they asked, their voice laced with a mix of frustration and fear. I tried to explain that I had opened it by mistake, but the neighbor's eyes widened in alarm as they glimpsed the contents still visible in the open box. "I need that back now," they said, their urgency increasing. "It's important." The atmosphere grew tense as I tried to piece together the situation. The neighbor's reaction was not just about retrieving a misdelivered package, but seemed to carry an underlying sense of dread. I handed over the box, feeling an uneasy chill as they quickly grabbed it and turned to leave. As the neighbor departed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Photographs and the note had left me feeling vulnerable and alarmed. I decided to call the police, explaining the unsettling incident and the possible connection between the package and my neighbor's strange behavior. The officer who arrived took the package for investigation, but the experience left me with a lingering sense of unease. The incident didn't end there. In the following days, I found myself constantly on edge, wary of every knock at the door and every shadow in the corner of my eye. Eerie feeling that I was being watched had intensified, turning my once peaceful neighborhood into a source of constant anxiety. The unsettling nature of the package and my neighbor's strange reaction continued to haunt me long after the police investigation was over. It started as a routine home improvement project. I hired a contractor to handle some much-needed repairs around the house, figuring it would be a simple process. I chose a local contractor based on recommendations and positive reviews. expecting a smooth and professional job. Little did I know, the repairs were just a facade for something far more sinister. At first, everything seemed normal. The contractor arrived on time, bringing tools and supplies, and set to work with an air of efficiency. But as the days went by, I began to notice odd behaviors. He would linger in certain rooms longer than necessary, his eyes darting around as if searching for something. There was a palpable shift in the atmosphere whenever he was around, a sense of unease I couldn't quite place. One afternoon, I came home early to check on the progress. As I entered the house, I noticed that the contractor had been working in the basement, a space I had specifically told him to leave alone. The door to the basement was slightly ajar, and I could hear him moving around inside. An unsettling feeling crept over me as I approached the open door. I hesitated for a moment before peeking inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. The contractor had set up an array of tools and equipment that had nothing to do with the repairs. Instead, there were odd contraptions and devices that seemed out of place and highly suspicious. My heart pounded as I realized that his intentions were far from professional. I confronted the contractor, trying to maintain a calm exterior despite the rising fear. "What's going on down there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His response was evasive, a quick smile that didn't reach his eyes. Just some extra work I thought needed doing. The situation quickly escalated. As I pressed further, he became defensive and agitated, revealing a dark side that had been concealed behind his polite facade. "You don't understand," he snapped. "This isn't about repairs. It's about something much more important." My instincts screamed that I needed to get out of the house immediately. I made a hurried excuse and retreated, my mind racing with thoughts of what the contractor might have been planning. The basement had become a place of dread, a chilling reminder of the hidden danger lurking beneath the surface. I called the police from a safe distance, reporting the suspicious behavior and the strange setup I had discovered. They arrived quickly, investigating the basement and the contractor's activities. The contractor was apprehended, and the items in the basement were identified as part of a scheme far more nefarious than simple home repairs. The ordeal left me shaken and deeply unsettled. The contractor's sinister plan had been narrowly thwarted, but the experience served as a stark reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk in even the most ordinary situation. The once familiar comfort of my home had been transformed into a place of fear and uncertainty. It was a typical grocery shopping trip, or so I thought. I had spent the afternoon navigating aisles and loading my cart with the week's necessities. The mundane task seemed harmless enough, but what happened next turned an ordinary outing into a nightmare. As I walked through the parking lot, my senses were on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I glanced around, but everything appeared normal. Other shoppers loading their bags, cars coming and going. I tried to brush off the uneasy sensation, attributing it to the shadows of the parking lot or my own overactive imagination. Reaching my car, I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the door as quickly as possible. The chill in the air seemed to intensify, making me even more anxious. I noticed a man lingering near his own vehicle, casting furtive glances in my direction. My anxiety spiked, but I told myself it was just paranoia. As I finally got the door open and began loading my groceries into the trunk, I heard footsteps approaching from behind. I spun around, expecting to see a fellow shopper or perhaps a store employee. Instead, the man I had seen earlier was now standing too close for comfort. His expression was unreadable, and a feeling of dread washed over me. I turned back to finish unloading my bags, trying to ignore the unsettling presence. But just as I was about to close the trunk, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Startled, I spun around to find the man grinning with a disturbingly calm demeanor. "You left your window open," he said, voice smooth but laced with menace. Confused, I glanced at my car and realized the driver's side window was indeed ajar. Before I could react, he pushed me aside and slid into the driver's seat. Panic surged through me as I tried to process what was happening. I needed to get away from the vehicle, but the man's swift and decisive actions left me with no time to think. I scrambled to get out of the way, stumbling back as he locked the doors and started the engine. My mind raced with fear as I looked around for help. But the parking lot was eerily quiet, with no one seeming to notice the unfolding drama. Desperate, I reached for my phone and dialed 911, trying to explain the situation while keeping my distance from the car. The dispatcher's calm voice offered a sliver of reassurance as they sent officers to the scene. The man, realizing he might be caught, seemed increasingly agitated, his eyes darting around as he waited for the police to arrive. In what felt like an eternity, police arrived and apprehended the intruder. The whole experience left me shaken and unnerved, a stark reminder of how quickly an ordinary errand can turn into a nightmare. The parking lot, once a mundane part of my routine, had become the setting for a chilling encounter that would haunt me for some time. It was just another evening at home when the power suddenly went out. The lights flickered once, then plunged everything into darkness. At first, I shrugged it off, assuming it was a routine outage. These things happened from time to time. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight and started searching for candles and a backup flashlight I kept for emergencies. The eerie silence of the house felt oppressive in the dark. The only sounds were the distant hum of the refrigerator and my own footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. I fumbled through drawers and cabinets, my anxiety growing with each passing second. The darkness seemed to press in on me, making every shadow look menacing. As I moved from room to room, I noticed something strange. Every light source I tried to use had been deliberately turned off. The flashlight I finally found had its batteries removed, and the candles had been snuffed out. It was as if someone had meticulously prepared for this moment, cutting off every possible means of illumination. Cold sweat broke out on my brow as a chilling realization sank in. The power outage wasn't a random event. Someone had intentionally cut the electricity. My heart raced as I tried to remain calm, piecing together the unsettling clues. The thought that someone might be lurking in the house with me was almost too much to bear. Suddenly, I heard a faint noise, soft, deliberate footsteps moving across the floor. My blood ran cold. The sounds came from somewhere close, just beyond the darkness. I held my breath, straining to hear any further movement. Every creak of the floorboard seemed magnified in the oppressive silence. I moved cautiously toward the sound, trying to keep my movements as quiet as possible. The darkness seemed to swallow every sound, making it difficult to gauge where the intruder might be. I called out, my voice trembling as I attempted to sound authoritative despite my fear. "Is someone there?" I asked, hoping to either draw the intruder out or scare them off. There was no response. The silence that followed was even more unnerving. I decided to retreat to a safer area, using my phone's dim light to guide my way. My mind raced with the realization that I was trapped in my own home, vulnerable, and at the mercy of someone who seemed to have an intimate knowledge of the house's layout. I dialed 911, whispering the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me that help was on the way, but each minute felt like an eternity as I waited. The darkness continued to press in, and every small noise made me flinch. The oppressive atmosphere was nearly unbearable, and the feeling of being hunted in my own home was a haunting terror I wouldn't soon forget. Eventually, the sound of sirens and the arrival of the police brought a sense of relief. They conducted a thorough search of the house, but the intruder had already fled. Power was restored, but the experience left me with an unsettling sense of vulnerability. The darkness had been more than just an absence of light. It had been a haunting reminder of how fragile my sense of security is. It started innocuously enough. Just a random text message from an unknown number. I glanced at my phone, curious. "Hey, I'm outside. Are you ready?" It read. I frowned, puzzled. I didn't recognize the number, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I replied, "Sorry, wrong number," and went about my day. The next day, another message arrived. "I see you're home. Is everything okay?" My heart skipped a beat. How could this stranger know that I was home? I chalked it up to coincidence and ignored the message, but the unsettling feeling lingered. The texts continued, each one more intrusive than the last. "Nice outfit today. Did you get it at that boutique you like?" The details were chilling. Things the sender shouldn't have known unless they were watching me. My anxiety grew with each new message, a gnawing fear that someone was tracking my every move. I decided to block the number, hoping that would end the harassment. But the next day, the messages came from a different number. I noticed you blocked me. That won't stop me from keeping an eye on you. Panic surged through me. I felt like I was being hunted. Each message a taunting reminder of my vulnerability. One night, just as I was about to settle in for bed, my phone buzzed with a new message. I'm at your front door. I can see you through the window. My blood ran cold. I rushed to the window, peering through the blinds, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The message felt like a sick joke, but the fear it evoked was all too real. I called the police, trying to remain calm as I explained the situation. Someone has been sending me disturbing texts, and now they're saying they're at my door. I don't know what to do. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way, but the wait felt excruciating. I kept a close eye on the door, my nerves on edge. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, seemed magnified. I could barely focus on anything else, the fear of the unknown gnawing at me. Finally, the police arrived and conducted a thorough search of the property, but the intruder was nowhere to be found. The text stopped after that night, but the unsettling experience left a lasting impact. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the knowledge that someone had breached my sense of security in such a personal way. Even now, I find myself checking over my shoulder, wary of any sign that the unsettling messages might return. It was supposed to be a quiet evening at home, just me and my thoughts. I had spent the day setting up a new security system, proud of how it promised to protect me and my home. The system had been carefully installed, cameras and sensors covering every entry point. I felt a sense of accomplishment, thinking I had ensured my safety. That night, things took a terrifying turn. As I settled into the living room with a book, the lights flickered and went out. My heart skipped a beat. Power had gone out suddenly, which seemed odd, considering the rest of the neighborhood still had lights on. I fumbled around, trying to turn on my phone's flashlight, but a wave of dread washed over me as I realized something was terribly wrong. The security system panel blinked ominously in the darkness. I reached for my phone to check the system's status, only to find that it wasn't connecting. Panic set in as I tried to access the control app, but the system was unresponsive. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I understood that the intruder had taken control of my security setup. I tried the door, only to find it locked. I wasn't alone in the house. Someone had breached the system and was now trapping me inside. The sound of footsteps echoed through the halls, sending shivers down my spine. My once safe sanctuary had transformed into a prison, and the realization was both chilling and disorienting. I made my way to the windows, hoping to escape through one of them. To my horror, they were all locked from the outside. The intruder had planned meticulously, ensuring that no easy escape routes were available. My heart raced as I searched for a way out, every creak and groan of the house amplifying my sense of fear. Desperate, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, explaining my situation in a frantic whisper. I'm locked inside my house. Someone has taken control of my security system, and I don't know where they are. The dispatcher's voice was calm and reassuring. Every passing second felt like an eternity as I waited for help. In the dark, I could hear the intruder moving closer. The feeling of being hunted, trapped in my own home, was suffocating. I found a hiding spot under the stairs, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I tried to stay as quiet as possible. Footsteps drew nearer, and the tension in the air was almost palpable. Finally, the sound of sirens cut through the oppressive silence. The intruder's footsteps stopped abruptly, and I could hear them moving away from my location. The police arrived and quickly worked to restore control over the security system. They managed to unlock the doors and free me from the nightmare I had been living. The intruder was nowhere to be found, but the sense of invasion left a deep scar. My home, once a place of safety, had become a chilling reminder of how easily security could be breached. The experience was haunting, a stark reminder that even the most secure systems could be vulnerable to those with malicious intent. It had been a long day, and I was looking forward to the comfort of home. I ordered a rideshare to take me from a late-night event, thinking it would be a simple and safe way to get back. When the driver arrived, everything seemed normal at first. The car was clean, and the driver greeted me with a friendly nod. As we drove off, I relaxed, scrolling through my phone to pass the time. The driver was chatty, making small talk that seemed innocuous enough. However, as the minutes ticked by, I started to notice something off. The route we were taking didn't match the one shown on my phone's map. The streets became increasingly unfamiliar. A creeping sense of unease settled over me. I tried to brush off my worries, telling myself it was just a detour or a minor mistake. The driver's demeanor grew more unsettling. His comments took on a darker tone, with hints of something menacing beneath the surface. "You know," he said with a twisted grin, "it's a good thing you're in my car. Not everyone who takes a rideshare ends up where they expect." My heart raced as I realized the gravity of the situation. The driver wasn't following the directions I had set. He was deliberately taking me somewhere I didn't want to go. Panic surged through me as I attempted to reason with him, my voice trembling. "I think you might be going the wrong way. Can you please turn around?" He only laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Oh, I'm taking you exactly where you need to go." His words dripped with menace, confirming my worst fears. I had to get out of the car before it was too late. As we approached a deserted area, I knew I had to act quickly. My mind raced through possible escape plans. I waited for a moment when the driver's attention was diverted, then made my move. I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached for the door handle, but it was locked. Desperation clawed at me as I struggled to open the door. With a burst of adrenaline, I managed to force it open, rowing myself out onto the pavement. I scrambled to my feet and ran, my heart pounding in my chest, as I darted through the dark streets. The driver's angry shouts echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. I kept running until I reached a well-lit area and flagged down a passing car for help. My hands were shaking as I explained the situation to the driver, who kindly offered to call the police for me. The relief of being safe and away from the terror I had just experienced was overwhelming. The rideshare driver was later apprehended, but the experience left me deeply shaken. The trust I had placed in a seemingly simple service had been violated in the most horrifying way. The ordeal served as a stark reminder of how quickly safety can be compromised and the importance of always staying vigilant. The night had been eerily quiet. I drifted off to sleep without a care, wrapped in the comfort of my own bed. It wasn't until I woke up in the dead of night that the terror began. I blinked groggily, my eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the curtains. That's when I saw him. A figure stood at the foot of my bed, motionless and menacing. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to make sense of the situation. The stranger's silhouette was barely discernible in the darkness, but the sense of danger was unmistakable. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as the reality of the situation sank in. Someone had invaded my home, and they were standing right beside me. I stifled a scream, my mind racing to formulate a plan. I had to act quickly if I wanted to survive. The stranger didn't move or make a sound, which made the situation all the more terrifying. It was as if he was waiting for something, or perhaps even enjoying my fear. Summoning every ounce of courage, I slowly reached for my phone on the nightstand, trying to keep my movements as quiet as possible. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, whispering the emergency to the dispatcher. "There's someone in my bedroom. I need help. Please hurry." As I spoke, I noticed the stranger's eyes, dark and hollow, fixated on me with a chilling intensity. The longer I looked, the more I realized how vulnerable I was. I needed to find a way out of this nightmare. I considered the options. I could try to escape through the window, but that would leave me exposed. I could try to fight, but I had no idea what the intruder was armed with. In a split-second decision, I decided to make a break for the door. I slid out of bed, moving as silently as I could, and edged toward the door. The stranger's gaze followed me, and I could feel his presence like a heavy weight in the room. As I reached for the doorknob, I heard a faint sound, almost like a whisper, coming from the intruder. With a burst of adrenaline, I threw open the door and ran into the hallway. My heart pounded in my chest as I dashed toward the nearest exit. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant noise, felt amplified in my heightened state of fear. I reached the front door and flung it open, stumbling out into the cool night air. The outside world felt like a stark contrast to the suffocating fear of my bedroom. I ran down the street, shouting for help, until a passing neighbor saw my distress and called the police. The authorities arrived quickly, conducting a thorough search of the house. They found no sign of the intruder, and I was left alone with my thoughts, trying to piece together the haunting experience. The stranger's presence had turned my safe haven into a scene of terror, and the memory of his cold, unblinking eyes would linger long after the night was over. The evening light filtered through the windows of my art studio, casting long shadows across the floor. I had spent hours working on a new piece, lost in the creative process. The studio was my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the world and immerse myself in my art. But that sense of security was shattered one fateful night. I arrived at the studio to find the door ajar. A sense of unease settled over me as I pushed it open, my footsteps echoing eerily in the quiet space. The room was in disarray. Canvases were scattered, paint supplies were knocked over, and there was a strange chill in the air. My heart raced as I realized that someone had been here, and it wasn't just a random break-in. As I surveyed the damage, I noticed something unsettling. A series of my sketches and paintings were missing. Among the scattered art supplies, I found a series of photographs pinned to the wall. They weren't just random snapshots. They were pictures of me, taken without my knowledge. Each photo was more invasive than the last, showing moments of my daily life that no one should have had access to. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The intruder had been watching me, stalking me for months. I felt a surge of fear mixed with anger as I tried to piece together what had happened. The artist's studio, once a safe haven, had become a chilling reminder of my vulnerability. My phone rang, breaking the silence. I glanced at the caller ID and saw a number I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was distorted, and the words sent a shiver down my spine. "I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. I hope you're ready for what comes next." I hung up, my mind racing. The photographs were not just an invasion of privacy. They were a prelude to something far more sinister. I needed to get out of the studio and call the police, but the sense of dread kept me frozen in place. I scanned the room for any signs of the intruder's presence. Just then, I heard a noise from the back of the studio. It was a faint scraping sound, as if someone was moving stealthily through the space. My pulse quickened as I crept toward the source of the noise, my eyes darting around for any sign of movement. The studio, once a creative sanctuary, had turned into a deadly battleground. In a desperate attempt to defend myself, I grabbed a heavy sculpture from a nearby pedestal. I felt the weight of it in my hands, a grim reminder of the threat I faced. As I turned the corner, I saw the intruder, a figure cloaked in darkness, his face obscured by a hood. The confrontation was swift and chaotic. We struggled, the fear and adrenaline fueling my every move. I had to outwit the intruder and find a way to escape. The art studio, now a twisted reflection of my terror, became a grim testament to the lengths to which someone would go to satisfy their obsession. Eventually, I managed to break free and call for help. The police arrived quickly, and the intruder was apprehended. But the trauma of that night lingered, a haunting reminder of the dangers that can lurk even in the places we consider safe. It was supposed to be just another late night at the office, catching up on paperwork while everyone else had long gone home. The office was eerily quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights my only companion as I tapped away at my keyboard. I had gotten used to the solitude, finding solace in the silence after the day's hustle. But tonight, something felt off. As I checked my email, a new message popped up in my inbox. It was from an unknown sender and contained a chilling note. "I see you're still working. I hope you're ready for what's coming." My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the message. It was probably a prank, told myself. Still, a knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. I dismissed the email and continued working, though the sense of unease lingered. Every sound, every shadow seemed amplified in the stillness of the office. My phone buzzed with a new message, and I hesitated before checking it. Another anonymous message appeared. "You're not alone. I'm closer than you think." Panic began to set in. I glanced around the dimly lit office. my eyes darting to the closed doors and darkened cubicles. The building was supposed to be empty, but the messages suggested otherwise. I quickly finished up my work, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I tried to keep my composure. As I prepared to leave, I noticed the hallway lights flickering, and a chill ran down my spine. Familiar, comforting space of the office now felt claustrophobic and threatening. I grabbed my bag and headed for the exit, my footsteps echoing ominously in the deserted hallways. Just as I reached the door, it swung open unexpectedly, and a shadowy figure stood in the doorway. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the stalker wasn't just sending messages. They were physically here, inside the building. The figure's face was obscured, but their presence was unmistakable. I had to think fast. I spun around and raced back into the office, my heart pounding in my chest. The stalker's footsteps followed closely behind, the sound of their pursuit sending shivers down my spine. My mind raced as I considered my options. I could try to barricade myself in a room, or find another way out. I ducked into a storage closet, closing the door quietly behind me. My phone buzzed again, and I took a deep breath before answering. Help? I'm at the office. There's someone here with me, and I don't know how to get out. I tried to stay calm as the dispatcher assured me that help was on the way. The minutes felt like hours as I waited, the sound of the stalker's footsteps growing nearer. The office, once a place of routine, had become a haunting labyrinth, and escaping it felt like a desperate fight for survival. It started as a peaceful hike, just me and the whispering trees. I've always found solace in nature, the crisp air, the rustling leaves. There's something about it that feels like a reset button for the soul. This trail, winding through a dense, ancient forest, was supposed to be my escape from the everyday chaos. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. First, I tried to ignore it. Prickling sensation at the back of my neck. The faint sound of leaves crunching underfoot that didn't match my own steps. It was probably just the forest playing tricks on me, thought. But the further I went, the stronger the feeling became. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I quickened my pace, but the presence seemed to follow, silent and haunting. The trail, once familiar, now seemed to twist and turn in ways that disoriented me. The path grew narrower, the trees closer together, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal hands. My heartbeat quickened with each step, the air growing colder, more oppressive. The light was fading fast, and with it any sense of safety I'd felt at the start of this hike. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes, sent chills down my spine. As darkness settled in, I knew I needed to find my way out quickly. But the trail was no longer clear. It seemed to shift and change before my eyes. Panic began to set in as I realized I might be lost. Presence, whatever it was, felt closer now, almost breathing down my neck. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something, or someone, lurking in the shadows. There was nothing, just the oppressive darkness and the sound of my own ragged breathing. I tried to remember the way back, but every turn looked the same, every tree a mirror of the last. My thoughts raced, trying to rationalize the fear, but it was too late. Terror had taken hold. Suddenly, I heard it, a soft, chilling whisper, barely audible but unmistakable. It wasn't in my head, it was real, and it was close. My heart pounded in my chest as I spun around, searching the darkness for the source. There was nothing but shadows. The whisper came again, this time clearer, more insistent. "You're not alone," it seemed to say. The words carried on the wind. I broke into a run, my feet pounding the earth, not caring where the path led as long as it took me away from that voice. The forest closed in around me, the branches scratching at my arms and face as I fled. The presence was no longer just a feeling, it was real, tangible, and it was chasing me. I ran until my lungs burned, icy air cutting through me like a knife. My mind was a blur of fear and confusion, the dark forest a maze with no escape. But then in the distance I saw it, faint light, flickering through the trees like a beacon. Hope surged through me as I sprinted towards it, praying it was the way out. The presence was right behind me now, its breath cold on the back of my neck. As I burst through the trees, I stumbled into a clearing, the light revealing an old, abandoned cabin. The door was slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. I had no choice. I dashed inside, slamming the door shut behind me. The cabin was cold, dark, but it was shelter. I could still hear the whispering outside, but it was distant now, fading. I had escaped, but just barely. The cabin felt like a sanctuary, but I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever had been following me was still out there, waiting. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and peered out the window. The forest was still. A sense of unease remained, lingering like a shadow. I had to find my way back to civilization, to safety. But the thought of stepping back into those dark woods sent a shiver down my spine. I waited until dawn, first light of day breaking through the trees, where I dared to leave the cabin. The forest, now bathed in the soft glow of morning, seemed almost peaceful again. But the memory of that night, the chilling whispers and the feeling of being hunted, stay with me forever. I made my way back to the trail, my legs weak, my mind exhausted, grateful to be alive. I had survived, but the forest would never be the same for me again. It was just another late night at the office, kind where the silence of the empty building felt almost comforting. I had stayed behind to finish a project, the hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft clatter of my keyboard, the only sounds breaking the quiet. When I finally packed up to leave, I stepped into the elevator, ready to head home. Little did I know, this ordinary ride would turn into one of the most chilling experiences of my life. The elevator doors slid shut with their usual mechanical precision, and I pressed the button for the ground floor. The elevator began its descent, but halfway down, it suddenly jolted to a stop. I frowned, pressing the button again, but nothing happened. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the metal walls. My heart began to race as I realized I was trapped. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but just as I unlocked it, the screen went black. The power had cut out completely. Panic began to rise in my chest as I fumbled in the darkness, trying to remain calm. That's when my phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number. The message was short but chilling. "You're not alone in there." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The words seemed to echo in the small, confined space. I quickly looked around, but of course, the elevator was empty. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The message didn't make any sense. How could someone know I was stuck? And worse, how could they suggest I wasn't alone? The darkness seemed to close in around me, the air thick with fear. Another buzz, another message. "I can see you." My hands trembled as I stared at the screen, my mind racing with fear. Felt as though the walls were closing in on me, the space shrinking with each passing second. I pressed myself against the corner of the elevator, trying to make myself as small as possible, as if that could protect me from whatever was happening. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, but the relief was short-lived. The elevator doors began to creak open, but instead of the ground floor, I was staring at a dark, empty corridor. The lights flickered again, casting long, eerie shadows. I knew I should stay inside the elevator, but something compelled me to step out. My instincts screamed at me to stay put. Curiosity and fear got the better of me. As I stepped into the hallway, the doors slammed shut behind me, trapping me outside the elevator. My heart pounded as I realized my mistake. Corridor stretched out before me, empty and silent, except for the soft hum of the building. I tried to find my way back. The corridor seemed to twist and turn, leading me deeper into the building. Feeling of being watched was overwhelming, sending chills down my spine. My phone buzzed again. Another message. "Turn around." I spun on my heel, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but there was nothing, just the empty corridor. Fear was almost paralyzing now, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I had to get out of there, but every direction looked the same, each turn leading to more darkness. Just as I was about to break into a run, the elevator doors at the end of the hallway slid open. Couldn't believe my luck. I sprinted toward the elevator, desperate to escape. But as I reached it, I realized something was wrong. The lights inside the elevator were off. The space was filled with a chilling, eerie presence. Doors began to close, but I forced myself inside, hoping it would take me to safety. The elevator jerked violently, and then it began to ascend, not descend. My heart sank as I realized I was going up, not down. My phone buzzed again, and I hesitated before looking at the message. Top floor, it read. The elevator dinged as it reached the top, the doors sliding open to reveal a pitch-black room. I had no choice but to step out, my legs trembling with fear. The room was cold, the air heavy with a sense of dread. I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. My phone buzzed one last time. You shouldn't have left the elevator. The doors slammed shut behind me, trapping me on the top floor. I was alone, or so I thought, but the darkness around me felt alive, as if something was lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. I had no choice but to face whatever was waiting for me in the shadows. The road stretched endlessly before me, a lonely ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desolate landscape. I had been driving for hours, the monotony of the journey broken only by the occasional passing car or the distant silhouette of a mountain. Night had fallen, and with it came an eerie sense of isolation. My gas gauge was dangerously low, and I knew I needed to find a station soon. That's when I spotted it, a small, dimly lit gas station just off the highway. Relieved, I pulled in and parked next to the lone pump. The place was old, paint peeling off the walls, and the sign overhead flickered weakly. There was no one in sight, but the lights were on, and that was good enough for me. I stepped out of the car, cool night air sending a shiver down my spine. The silence was unnerving, but I shrugged it off and began to fill up the tank. As I waited, I glanced around, noticing the station's unsettling stillness. The store's windows were dark, and there was no sign of the attendant. It struck me as odd. I figured they were inside, maybe taking a break. Once the tank was full, I replaced the nozzle and headed inside to pay. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the empty station. Inside, the air was stale, and the dim fluorescent lights cast long shadows across the shelves. The counter was empty, and there was no sign of anyone. "Hello?" I called out, but my voice seemed to die in the silence. I rang the bell on the counter, hoping to get someone's attention. Still nothing. An uneasy feeling began to creep over me, the kind that makes your skin crawl. Something wasn't right. I decided to leave the cash on the counter and get out of there. But as I turned to go, I heard a faint noise, a soft rustling, like someone moving in the back room. My heart skipped a beat as I froze, listening intently. The rustling grew louder, more deliberate, as if someone or something was making its way toward me. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the station into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone, the only source of light I had. The faint glow illuminated the room just enough for me to see that I was alone, at least for now. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming, chilling presence that seemed to close in around me. I bolted for the door, desperate to escape. But when I stepped outside, I was met with an even more terrifying sight. My car, the only vehicle in the lot, had its headlights on, but the engine was dead. I ran to it, frantically trying to start the ignition. The car refused to come to life. The shadows around the station seemed to deepen, closing in on me like a suffocating blanket. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a dark figure standing at the edge of the lot, barely visible in the weak light. My heart raced as I tried to make out who or what it was. The figure remained in the shadows, watching me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. The realization hit me hard. I wasn't alone, and whoever was out there had no intention of letting me leave. Desperation took over as I slammed my fists on the steering wheel, willing the car to start. The figure began to move toward me, slowly, deliberately, like a predator stalking its prey. My hands trembled as I turned the key again and again, praying for the engine to roar to life. Finally, with a sputter and a groan, the car started. I didn't waste a second. I threw it into gear and sped out of the lot, gravel flying as I raced back onto the highway. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the figure standing at the edge of the lot. but the gas station had vanished into the darkness, swallowed up by the night. My heart was still pounding, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I didn't dare slow down, not until I was miles away, the lights of a distant town finally coming into view. The encounter left me shaken, a haunting reminder of how quickly a routine stop could turn into a nightmare. The gas station, once a beacon of safety on the lonely road, had become a place of terror. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something far worse than I could imagine, and that whoever, or whatever, was at that station would still be out there, waiting for the next unlucky traveler to stop by.